Hello, humanoids! This is Ian T. Mello, and welcome to Squared Circle History, the podcast that chooses a promotion, focuses on a specific year, and gives a comprehensive and unbiased look at the best matches, moments, promos, and feuds. I encourage you to check out the actual footage of the wrestling events that are being discussed because, and I cannot stress this enough, the intent of this podcast is to make new fans of the product of the yesteryear. I'm a lifelong wrestling fan, and I love all of the history that there is of televised professional wrestling. So let's travel through wrestling history together here on Squared Circle History. Today we are going to focus on World Championship Wrestling in 1995, and what a year it was. To put you in the right time frame, let's go through what was happening in pop culture during the year of 1995. 1995 saw the release of numerous memorable films, such as Toy Story, Seven, Casino, Billy Madison, Tommy Boy, The Usual Suspects, Apollo 13, Friday, Braveheart, Mallrats, Bad Boys, Batman Forever, Jumanji, Clueless, Mortal Kombat, Heat, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, Waterworld, Pocahontas, Ace Ventura When Nature Calls, Outbreak, Showgirls, Crimson Tide, Major Payne, Nixon, While You Were Sleeping, Dangerous Minds, Species, Desperado, Goldeneye, Get Shorty, To Wong Fu, Thanks for Everything, Julie Newmar, 13 Monkeys, The Net, The Indian in the Cupboard, Babe, Judge Dredd, Dead Presidents, Empire Records, Casper, A Goofy Movie, Mr. Holland's Opus, Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead, To Die For, Sabrina, Leaving Las Vegas, Dead Man Walking, The Jerky Boys Movie, and Die Hard with a Vengeance. The year saw the release of multiple hit albums, such as the debut album from the Foo Fighters, One Hot Minute by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, What's the Story Morning Glory by Oasis, Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette, The Bends by Radiohead, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness by the Smashing Pumpkins, Tragic Kingdom by No Doubt, and Out Come the Wolves by Rancid, King for a Day, Fool for a Lifetime by Faith No More, Astro Creep 2000 by White Zombie, NOLA by Down, Osmosis by Ozzy Osbourne, Dopes to Infinity by Monster Magnet, and The Circus Leaves Town by Caius, Above by Mad Season, Gangsta's Paradise by Coolio, Return to the 36 Chambers, the dirty version, by Old Dirty Bastard, Liquid Swords by Jizza, To Bring You My Love by PJ Harvey, The Infamous by Mobb Deep, Only Built for Cuban Links by Raekwon, Me Against the World by Tupac Shakur, History, Past, Present, and Future Book 1 by Michael Jackson, E90 Eternal by Bone Thugs and Harmony, Daydream by Mariah Carey, and self-titled albums from Alice in Chains and Clutch. On television, we saw the debuts of Star Trek Voyager, News Radio, Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel, Road Rules, Sailor Moon, Pinky and the Brain, The Drew Carey Show, Xena Warrior Princess, Jag, The Outer Limits, Mr. Show with Bob and David, Freakazoid, The Jeff Foxworthy Show, Mad TV, and Goosebumps. In the news, the decision of the O.J. Simpson trial was seen by 150 million viewers, with Simpson found not guilty in a controversial decision. Jerry Garcia, beloved frontman of the iconic band The Grateful Dead, died from a heart attack. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame opened in Cleveland, Ohio. We lost baseball legend Mickey Mantle and sports broadcaster Howard Cosell in the same year. And finally, in England, a sheep was cloned from embryos in a major scientific breakthrough. While the World Wrestling Federation continued to lose business, all this paled in comparison to what was happening in World Championship Wrestling. In a bold move, Eric Bischoff suggested that the company go head-to-head with the WWF in prime time on cable on Monday nights. Ted Turner greenlit the idea, with WCW Monday Nitro airing on TNT that fall, beginning the Monday Night Wars, and arguably the most exciting time period in professional wrestling history. Join us on this trip as we journey back to WCW in 1995. The January 8th edition of the Main Event saw Johnny B. Bad defend the World Television Championship against Arn Anderson, who had Colonel Robert Parker and Ming in his corner. Parker got involved, putting Anderson's foot on the bottom rope to break up a pinfall attempt. This distracted Bad, who got his hands on Parker. Anderson capitalized and scored a fluke pinfall victory over Bad to become the new World Television Champion. The January 14th episode of Saturday Night featured a promo from the Monster Maniacs, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan, the Macho Man Randy Savage, and the Mouth of the South, Jimmy Hart. Hogan talked about getting caught off guard by Vader, but he had an obstacle he'd have to get past first. He hyped their upcoming match at the Clash of the Champions against Kevin Sullivan and the Butcher. Savage said that he wants to be the special guest referee for the eventual match between Hogan and Vader. In the main event, Stars and Stripes defended the WCW World Tag Team Championships against Harlem Heat, who had Sister Sherry in their corner. Sherry provided the distraction that Harlem Heat needed, with Booker T scoring the pinfall victory for his team, despite being the illegal man in the ring. Harlem Heat were crowned the new WCW World Tag Team Champions. The January 21st edition of Saturday Night featured a Battle of the Brothers, with Kevin Sullivan facing Dave Sullivan. The Butcher ambushed Dave to cause a disqualification and assist Kevin in a 2-on-1 beatdown. With scissors in hand, the Butcher cut up the special robe that Hulk Hogan had given to Dave. Kevin spiked Dave with a pile driver, with the Butcher cutting off Dave's hair. The Butcher then cut the special yellow boots right off of Dave's feet and tossed them aside. A disgusted Mean Gene interviewed Kevin Sullivan and the Butcher, who hyped their upcoming match against the Monster Maniacs. An up-close segment aired, highlighting the football career of Flying Brian Pillman. He said that he's been told his entire career that he's too small, but that hasn't stopped him from achieving success in both football and professional wrestling. Pillman discussed the 33 surgeries he's had on his vocal cords, resulting in his signature raspy voice. He talked about his upcoming cameo on the hit show Baywatch. Pillman said that he still had the eye of the tiger and plans to achieve success when he returns to the ring. The 30th Clash of the Champions took place on January 25th from Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. A music video aired hyping Das Wunderkind Alex Wright, who did his signature dance move in between clips of his matches. The Nature Boy Ric Flair came to the ring with a woman on each arm. Flair took a seat in the crowd, with Bobby Heenan not far behind to shake the hand of the Nature Boy. From the locker room, Mean Gene interviewed the Monster Maniacs, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan, the Macho Man Randy Savage, and the Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart. They hyped the upcoming main event match against Kevin Sullivan and the Butcher, as well as the fact that both the Nature Boy Ric Flair and Vader would be in the crowd. Sting battled the Avalanche, with the Guardian Angel serving as the special guest referee. It took 4 Stinger splashes to get the Avalanche to wobble, with Sting body slamming him in an impressive feat. Sting locked in the Scorpion Deathlock, with Avalanche submitting. However, the Angel refused to stop the match. Referee Nick Patrick ran in to overrule the Angel and call for the bell. An irate Angel shoved Patrick to the mat and pushed Sting aside. Sting clobbered the Angel with a punch to the face. The Angel tackled Sting and unleashed a beatdown on him. Members of the locker room raced to the ring to save Sting and run off the Angel. Mean Gene interviewed the Angel, who was irate that Nick Bockwinkel would send another official to overrule him. The Angel ripped off his Guardian Angel shirt and said that he was going back to his roots. He'd now be known as Big Bubba Rogers. In the main event, the Monster Maniacs, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan, and the Macho Man Randy Savage faced Kevin Sullivan and the Butcher. Hogan soon found himself asleep on the mat thanks to the Butcher's sleeper hold. Savage thought fast, jumping off the top rope and nailing Hogan with a flying elbow drop. Hogan charged to his feet, revitalized. Savage tagged in, but fell victim to a 2-on-1 beatdown. One slip-up allowed Savage to tag in Hogan, who cleaned house. With the referee's back turned, Savage hit the Butcher with a flying elbow drop. Hogan followed it up by hitting the leg drop and getting the pinfall victory over the Butcher. Following the bout, Vader knocked Savage out of the ring and went toe-to-toe with Hogan. The Hulkster gave Vader 3 punches to the face, but the big man was unfazed. Vader powerbombed Hogan with ease, but the Hulkster popped up moments later. Hogan and Savage knocked Vader off his feet, with Jimmy Hart tossing his team a pair of chairs. Vader retreated, with Hogan daring him to return to the ring. The Monster Maniacs posed in the ring to end the broadcast. The January 28th episode of Saturday Night featured a vignette of Flying Brian Pillman in California on the set of the hit show Baywatch. Pillman met with the director, who presented him with his script. Pillman's character on the show was appropriately named California Brian. Quick cuts showed Pillman running down the beach and learning his lines. In the main event, Arn Anderson defended the World Television Championship against the Macho Man Randy Savage. Ming provided a distraction from ringside, allowing Anderson to gain the advantage, while Colonel Robert Parker cackled in the background. Both men battled back and forth, with Parker getting cheap shots in on Savage behind the referee's back. Savage fought back and sent Anderson soaring out of the ring and to the floor. Flying off the top rope, Savage landed on Anderson with a double axe handle. Back in the ring, Savage scrambled for a pinfall as the clock ticked down. Parker distracted Savage, allowing Anderson to shift the momentum. Just as Savage slammed Anderson off the top rope, the time limit expired. Still, Savage jumped off the top rope, nailing Anderson with a flying elbow drop. Savage scored the pinfall, but wouldn't win the title because it didn't happen within the initial 15 minutes. Bunkhouse Buck, Dirty Dick Slater, and the Blacktop Bully ambushed Savage, with Sting and the Natural Dustin Rhodes racing in to even the odds. The February 11th edition of Saturday Night featured a vignette with the Nature Boy Ric Flair. He talked about needing to be in the wrestling business and nobody can stop him. Flair said he's the only man that's been in the ring with both Vader and Hulk Hogan. He gave his predictions for Super Brawl, saying that there's no stopping Vader. Flair challenged the powers that be to meet him next week and try to stop him from being in the WCW. A vignette aired on Sting, where he gave a tour of his entrance jackets. He then talked about his face paint, saying that he wanted to get attention and stand out. Sting recreated the paint job that he had at the Great American Bash in 1990 when he won the World Heavyweight Championship for the first time. Mean Gene interviewed the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan and Jimmy Hart. Hogan said that he's sick of hearing everybody else's opinions. He said that he's going to tear Vader limb from limb in Baltimore. Hogan told Hart to keep an eye out for Ric Flair. The Hulkster said that he was going to slam Vader and prove the naysayers wrong. The February 18th edition of Saturday Night saw Tony Schiavone interview the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Nick Bockwinkel was present to hear out Flair, who said he was tired of watching WCW on TV. Flair clarified that he's retired, but he wants to be involved in the company, even if he had to buy it. He said he's going to be at Super Brawl in the front row to watch the clash between Hulk Hogan and Vader. Super Brawl 5 took place on February 19th, beginning with footage of Vader in the parking lot going ballistic. A limo pulled up, with Vader punching out the limo driver and asking if Hulk Hogan was in the back. Vader punched out a window, with a frightened Tony Schiavone running away from the limo. Footage aired from the main event, with Vader disrupting a match and attacking the opponents. In the opening match, Das Wunderkind Alex Wright faced Pretty Paul Roma. Famously, Roma wasn't happy about the match and refused to cooperate with Wright during certain parts. It resulted in an awkward bout, with Wright ultimately picking up the victory. In the main event, Hulk Hogan defended the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Vader. The Hulkster's punches didn't faze Vader, who shook off the shots from the champion. Nature Boy Ric Flair watched from the front row, with the Great Muta spotted nearby. Vader mauled Hogan with vicious punches, and then squashed him with a big splash. On the floor, Hogan reversed an Irish whip, with Vader tumbling over a guardrail and onto the lap of Flair. Back in the ring, Hogan connected with a big boot, and then sent Vader tumbling over the top rope with a big clothesline. In the ring, Hogan attempted a body slam, but crumbled under the weight of Vader. Hogan looked into the camera and said, "The man is too strong." Vader connected with the Vader Bomb, with Hogan barely kicking out. Climbing back to the top rope, Vader soared with a moonsault, with Hogan rolling out of the way. Hogan pulled Vader to the floor and bashed him repeatedly with a steel chair. The match continued in the ring, with Vader choke-slamming Hogan. Shortly after, the Hulkster hulked up, punching Vader repeatedly and connecting with a big boot. Hogan hit the leg drop, with Vader kicking out at 1. Vader tackled Hogan, knocking out the referee in the process. With the referee injured, Vader slammed Hogan to the mat with a powerbomb. Vader made the cover, but nobody was there to make the count. Flair ran into the ring and made the 3 count, which did Vader no good. With the referee shaken awake by Flair, Vader hit Hogan with a big splash. Vader made the cover, with Hogan kicking out. Hogan clotheslined Vader over the top rope, causing Flair to attack the Hulkster and cause a disqualification. Just as Hogan began to fight back, Vader attacked, leading to a 2-on-1 beatdown on the champion. Flair locked Hogan in the figure 4, with Randy Savage and Sting racing to the ring for the save. Vader and Flair high-fived as they left, with fireworks exploding for Hogan, who posed for the crowd. The February 25th episode of Saturday Night began with the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, Hulk Hogan, coming to the set with a leather strap around his neck. Backed by Jimmy Hart, the Hulkster joined Tony Schiavone for an interview. With Nick Bockwinkel on set, Hogan demanded a strap match against Vader at Uncensored. Since the strap match is Vader's specialty, Hogan said that a victory would be even sweeter. Later, Vader and the Nature Boy Ric Flair came to the set for an interview with Tony Schiavone. Vader called himself the uncrowned heavyweight champion of the world. Swinging the leather strap, Hulk Hogan interrupted, with security stepping between he, Flair, and Vader. As Doug Dillinger laid down the law, Commissioner Nick Bockwinkel ordered that Hogan, Flair, and Vader be removed from the building. The March 4th edition of Saturday Night saw Mean Gene interview Lord Steven Regal, who was on a quest to find a new tag team partner. Beautiful Bobby Eaton offered to be Regal's partner, but Regal wasn't impressed. Regal bet Gene that Eaton plays a banjo. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair accompanied Vader for his match against the Patriot. Vader brutalized his opponent, but failed to make a pinfall attempt. The WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan raced to the ring and attacked Vader. Hogan began to choke Vader with a leather strap. Flair tried crawling into the ring, but Jimmy Hart pulled him out of the ring, causing a chase around ringside. The Nasty Boys and Hacksaw Jim Duggan pried Hogan off of Vader, who retreated. Tony Schiavone interviewed Hogan, who said that he's going to be the maniac that he had to be to take out Vader. The March 11th edition of Saturday Night saw Mean Gene interview Lord Steven Regal, who addressed the news that people complained about his treatment of beautiful Bobby Eaton. Regal said he could care less and said that Eaton was as bad as the fans. Eaton interrupted, asking if Regal wanted to be his partner. Regal wasn't interested, and instead agreed to face Eaton the following week. The March 18th episode of Saturday Night saw Lord Steven Regal battle beautiful Bobby Eaton. It didn't take long for Eaton to out-wrestle Regal, who retreated to the interview set to join Mean Gene. It was at that moment that Regal decided that Eaton would make a wonderful tag team partner. Confused, Eaton accepted Regal's proposal, sealed with a trepidatious handshake. After winning an enhancement match, Vader continued to brutalize his defeated opponent. Dave Sullivan attempted to convince the Nature Boy Ric Flair to stop Vader's destruction. His pleas fell on deaf ears, as Vader pummeled Sullivan and squashed him with a big splash off the top rope. Flair joined in, unleashing a beatdown on a defenseless Sullivan. Bobby the Brain Heenan left the broadcast booth to tell Flair that he was going too far. Nick Bockwinkel led a slew of officials to the ring and ordered Flair and Vader to leave the arena. At the end of the broadcast, Flair and Vader returned to invade the broadcast booth. An irate Nick Bockwinkel put his foot down, saying that Flair was no longer allowed in WCW. Flair got in Bockwinkel's face, saying that since there are no rules, he plans to be at Uncensored. The March 19th episode of The Main Event saw the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan cut a promo from a smoke-filled room. Hogan said that he had an ultimate surprise, but said that it wasn't the Ultimate Warrior. The Hulkster said that he searched high and low for somebody to watch his back. Through the smoke stood a long-haired, jacked-up wrestler that Hogan called the Renegade. Hogan said that the Renegade would watch his back during the strap match against Vader. Uncensored took place on March 19th, live on pay-per-view from Tupelo, Mississippi, with the event advertised as having no rules. Dustin Rhodes battled the Blacktop Bully in the back of a moving 18-wheeler in what was called a King of the Road match. The two men battled amongst bales of hay, with the object being to sound the horn at the front of the truck. WCW had recently issued a no-blood policy, which was broken as both men bled from the forehead. Both men climbed up the wooden framing, each reaching for the horn. The Bully knocked Rhodes off the frame and sounded the horn to signal the end of the match. Following the match, both men were fired from the promotion. The Macho Man Randy Savage battled the Avalanche, with a woman dressed in black attacking Savage on the floor. Back in the ring, the supposed woman ripped off her wig, revealing it to be the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Avalanche crushed Savage with an avalanche splash, which brought out the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan running into the ring. Flair and Avalanche retreated, with Savage declared the winner by disqualification at a no disqualification event. WCW World Tag Team Champions Harlem Heat battled the Nasty Boys in a Texas Tornado Rules non-title match. Sister Sherry got involved in a wild bout that made its way to and destroyed the concession stands. Cotton candy was tossed around, and Harlem Heat got covered in mustard. Both teams slid around as the brawling raged on until Brian Knobbs scored a pinfall victory atop the remains of a concession stand. In the main event, Hulk Hogan defended the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Vader in a strap match. Nature Boy Ric Flair was in Vader's corner, while Hogan introduced his ultimate surprise to watch his back. Out came the Renegade, a character obviously influenced by the Ultimate Warrior. Renegade kept a close eye on Flair, allowing the match to commence between Hogan and Vader. Hogan felt the Vader bomb early on, and then got whipped with a leather strap. With clothes ripped and tattered, Jimmy Hart raced to the ring to cheer Hogan on. Hogan got hold of a chair, bashing Vader repeatedly across the face. Back in the ring, Vader chokeslammed Hogan and crushed him with a big splash. Hogan shook it off, struck Vader with a big boot, and hit the leg drop. He began dragging Vader around the ring, touching each corner along the way. A masked man raced to the ring and clobbered the Renegade with a chair. This allowed Flair to ambush a distracted Hogan, smashing him with a wooden chair. Flair then smashed the chair over Renegade's back. Vader began to drag Hogan around the ring, touching three corners before Flair stopped him to inflict more damage on the Hulkster. Climbing to the second rope, Vader somersaulted through the air, with Hogan rolling out of the way just in time. Flair untied Vader and dragged him out of the ring. After smashing a chair across Hogan's back, Flair began to strut around the ring. Hogan hulked up and began whipping Flair with the leather strap. The Hulkster strapped Flair in and dragged him around the ring to touch all four corners. For some reason, that counted, with the bell ringing to signal the end of the match. Just as the Renegade stood by Hogan's side, a masked man ran into the ring with a steel chair. Suddenly, Arn Anderson emerged from the entrance with his hands and feet bound and a rope around his mouth, wearing the same outfit as the Masked Man. The Masked Man in the ring attacked Vader and Flair with a chair, and then unmasked. It was Macho Man Randy Savage, who stood tall with Hogan, Renegade, and Jimmy Hart. The March 25th episode of Saturday Night featured a vignette with Lord Steven Regal and beautiful Bobby Eaton in England. Regal was appalled at the way Eaton was dressed, calling him a Saturday Night Fever reject. Seated at a table in a fine dining establishment, Regal taught a rigid Eaton about proper dining etiquette. Regal said that it was going to be far worse than he ever imagined. WCW Commissioner Nick Bockwinkel delivered an announcement from his office. In his office stood the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, and Jimmy Hart. Hogan and Savage demanded that Nature Boy Ric Flair be reinstated so they can get their hands on him. Bockwinkel said that it would have to go to a vote, which would take place the following week. The April 1st episode of Saturday Night featured footage from a board meeting headed by Nick Bockwinkel. They discussed the topic of Nature Boy Ric Flair wanting to be reinstated. Upon voting, it was a tie, which meant that no decision could be rendered at that time. An ad ran, paid for by the Nature Boy Ric Flair, campaigning for reinstatement. Flair's message was that he wanted all parties involved to be fair to Flair. The man himself read off the top 10 reasons why WCW should be fair to Flair. The April 2nd edition of the main event featured a vignette with Lord Steven Regal taking beautiful Bobby Eaton shopping for a new suit. A tailor took his measurements and transformed Eaton into something more presentable to Regal. The April 8th edition of Saturday Night featured another Be Fair to Flair vignette. Flair cut a promo next to a cardboard cutout of Hulk Hogan. The Nature Boy pleaded with Hulk to put in a good word for him for reinstatement. Flair said that if Hogan is fair to him, he promises to become a Hulkamaniac. The April 9th episode of the main event featured a vignette with Lord Steven Regal teaching beautiful Bobby Eaton how to speak proper English. Regal and Eaton traveled to Buckingham Palace in order to meet the Queen. Eaton was knighted, with Regal getting emotional. The segment ended with Regal and Eaton getting their shoes shined. The April 15th edition of Saturday Night saw Bobby the Brain Heenan break the news that Diamond Dallas Page had won $13 million in Las Vegas. A vignette aired from Dave Sullivan's home, where he thanked the fans for sending him gifts and well wishes. Dave was excited to take a phone call from Hulk Hogan, but was interrupted by a visitor. It was the Diamond Doll, who dropped off a gift for Dave, but admitted she was going to be in a lot of trouble. Footage aired from the boardroom, where Nick Bockwinkel led a meeting concerning the reinstatement of Ric Flair. Appearing to plead their case was the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, and Jimmy Hart. They begged the committee to reinstate Flair so they could get their hands on him. Another vote was held, with enough votes gained to reinstate Flair. In the main event, Vader teamed with the World Television Champion Arn Anderson to battle Stars and Stripes. Minutes into the bout, the Nature Boy Ric Flair made his way to ringside to give Vader and Anderson an unfair advantage. In the end, Vader squashed Marcus Bagwell with a big splash, and Anderson scored the pinfall victory. Following the match, Flair stomped on a foam Hulk Hogan souvenir, with Vader ripping it apart. Tony Schiavone interviewed Flair, Vader, and Anderson, with the Nature Boy cutting a promo on Hogan. Flair said, "I'm back, and you're out." The April 22nd episode of Saturday Night saw Eric Bischoff on location from a fancy restaurant. Bischoff conducted an interview with Diamond Dallas Page, who wore a suit and puffed on a cigar. With the Diamond Doll, and his bodyguard Max Muscle by his side, DDP talked about winning $13 million in Las Vegas. DDP flaunted his gold, but said he needed gold around his waist. The April 29th edition of Saturday Night featured a vignette where Diamond Dallas Page, the Diamond Doll, and Max Muscle went on a shopping spree. DDP frivolously spent money on clothing and fine art. A vignette aired, with Dave Sullivan shown training at a playground, with a group of children cheering him on. Dave was then shown training at the WCW power plant, tossing opponents around with ease. He flexed his muscles and said that he was ready to return to the ring. The May 6th episode of Saturday Night featured another vignette with Diamond Dallas Page frivolously spending money with the Diamond Doll and Max Muscle. They were at a car lot, with DDP buying cars for the Doll and Max, and then buying himself a Lamborghini Diablo. The May 13th episode of Saturday Night featured footage of Macho Man Randy Savage and his father, Angelo Poffo, sitting on a dock overlooking the water. Savage asked his father for advice for his upcoming match, teaming with Hulk Hogan to face Nature Boy Ric Flair and Vader. Poffo said that Flair and Vader might have a devilish plan, and Savage and Hogan should be conscious. The May 20th edition of Worldwide Wrestling saw the Nature Boy Ric Flair and Vader battle the masked team of Los Dos Amigos. While Flair and Vader backed their opponents into a corner, the Renegade raced to ringside to ambush Arn Anderson. The Renegade took down Flair and Vader with a double clothesline, allowing Los Dos Amigos to capitalize. They unmasked, revealing themselves to be Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage. Flair and Vader retreated as Hogan, Savage, and the Renegade posed in the ring. The May 20th edition of Saturday Night saw Macho Man Randy Savage walking down the beach with his father, Angelo Poffo. They hyped Savage's upcoming match at Slamboree, teaming with Hulk Hogan to face Vader and the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Poffo predicted that Flair and Vader are confident, so they must have an evil plan. Savage said, DTA, don't trust anybody. Fans swarmed Savage and Poffo, who hyped Slamboree. Savage led everyone to the bay, running in together to end the vignette. Slamboree took place on May 21st, beginning with the Nasty Boys defeating Harlem Heat to win the WCW World Tag Team Championships. The man formerly known as The Butcher was now called The Man with No Name. He lost to Kevin Sullivan in short order. Following the match, King Curtis Iaukea sat on a throne covered in moss and cobwebs. Iaukea urged Sullivan to join him in the darkness. Sullivan hopped the guardrail and ran away through the crowd. The screen turned black and white for the Legends match between Dick Murdoch and Chief Wahoo McDaniel. Bobby the Brain Heenan and Gordon Solie called the match, which was the highlight. McDaniel was victorious after a big chop. Backstage, Mean Gene interviewed the Nature Boy Ric Flair, the World Television Champion Arn Anderson, and Vader. Flair was dressed casually, saying he won't need to put on his ring gear since Vader will take care of everything. Both Flair and Vader promised a harsh fate for both Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage. Vader flexed his biceps, naming them Itsy and Bitsy. Gordon Solie hosted the WCW Hall of Fame induction ceremony, with the class including Chief Wahoo McDaniel, Terry Funk, Angelo Poffo, Antonio Inoki, the late Big John Studd, and the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Handing his award to his son Cody, Dusty gave an appreciative speech, thanking the many people that helped him throughout his illustrious career. Dusty then made a surprise induction, Gordon Solie, who was completely caught off guard. Solie then gave an emotional speech. In the main event, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man Randy Savage battled the Nature Boy Ric Flair and Vader. As the Monster Maniacs made their entrance, a giant superstar lurked at the curtain. Hogan looked back in awe as the giant was escorted away by Doug Dillinger. Arn Anderson stood in the corner of Flair and Savage, with Jimmy Hart and the Renegade standing in the corner of the Maniacs. Flair and Vader dominated, with Hogan taking a Vader bomb. Vader attempted a moonsault, but Hogan rolled to safety. Savage tagged in and hit a flying elbow drop onto Flair. Anderson lured Savage to the floor, where Vader took down the Macho Man with a body tackle. Back in the ring, Vader soared through the air with a moonsault, landing on Savage. Hogan broke up a pinfall attempt, with a concerned Angelo Poffo watching from the crowd. The Hulkster tagged in and body slammed Vader with ease. After knocking Anderson off the apron, Hogan connected with a big boot to the face of Flair. Hogan ran against the ropes, but got tripped up by Anderson. Vader squashed Hogan with a big splash, with Savage attacking Vader and brawling with him on the floor. Flair held Hogan in place, while Anderson jumped off the top rope with a double axe handle. Hogan moved, with Anderson striking Flair. The Hulkster hit Flair with a big leg drop and scored the pinfall victory. Flair, Vader, and Anderson ambushed Hogan, Savage, Renegade, and Hart during their celebration. Angelo Poffo ran in, but was attacked by Flair and Anderson. Flair locked Poffo in the figure 4, with Anderson stomping on him. Hogan and the Renegade ran off the villains, while Savage attended to his injured father. The June 3rd episode of Saturday Night saw Tony Schiavone interview the World Television Champion Arn Anderson, who did his best to provoke the Macho Man Randy Savage. Backstage, Sting attempted to calm down a seething Savage. In the main event, Macho Man Randy Savage was scheduled to face Nature Boy Ric Flair in a semi-final match in the United States Championship Tournament. With Flair nowhere to be found, Savage raced out of the ring and through the curtain to scour the backstage area in search of the Nature Boy. Savage found Flair, attacking him in a hallway. Arn Anderson got involved, assisting Flair and getting cheap shots in on Savage. Sting and the Renegade raced to the scene, with Savage continuing to get at Flair. As officials tried to restrain Savage, Flair and Anderson hopped into a limo and left the arena. An irate Savage chased after the limo, standing in the middle of the road while cars drove by. The June 10th edition of Saturday Night featured a vignette beginning with a scared Kevin Sullivan entering a mysterious dungeon. Sitting upon a stone throne was King Curtis Iakea, who shouted at Sullivan. He said that Sullivan was the last link into the darkness and the only hope to end Hulkamania. Frustrated and crying, Sullivan said that there was no way that he could defeat millions of Hulkamaniacs from around the globe. Iaukea said that there were warriors gathering from 4 continents to form the Dungeon of Doom. He said that Sullivan would lead them into war against Hulkamania. The June 17th edition of Saturday Night featured another vignette with King Curtis Iaukea in his dungeon, yelling from his throne at Kevin Sullivan. Iaukea urged a frustrated Sullivan to take the final step, with Sullivan racing through a dark door. Moments later, Iaukea introduced a new character portrayed by Sullivan, the Taskmaster. Wearing a red robe and black face paint on his forehead, Sullivan bared a devilish grin, with Iaukea saying that he had the power to crush Hulkamania. Iaukea said, "It is etched in stone." The pair laughed maniacally to end the segment. The Great American Bash took place on June 18th from Dayton, Ohio. In the opening match, Flying Brian Pillman and Alex Wright brought the fans to their feet in a hard-fought battle. Pillman showed a more aggressive side, but ultimately lost to the rookie, Wright. Following the bout, both men shook hands, with Pillman raising the arm of Wright. Footage was shown from the main event, which took place prior to the pay-per-view. Eric Bischoff interviewed Nick Bockwinkel, who attempted to make an announcement concerning a future match between the World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan and Vader. Out came Vader, who bullied Bischoff and shoved Bockwinkel aside. Out came Hogan, who ambushed Vader and pounded on him. Wrestlers restrained Hogan and dragged him away. In front of the live crowd, Tony Schiavone interviewed Bockwinkel, who announced the main event for Bash at the Beach. Hulk Hogan would defend the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Vader inside of a steel cage. Arn Anderson defended the World Television Championship against the Renegade. Withstanding everything Anderson threw at him, the Renegade hit a big splash off the top rope and scored an upset victory. The Renegade was crowned the new World Television Champion. Sting battled Ming in the finals of the United States Championship Tournament. After a hard-fought battle, Sting emerged victorious and was crowned the new United States Champion. In the main event, the Macho Man Randy Savage battled the Nature Boy Ric Flair. With the show taking place on Father's Day, Savage brought his father, Angelo Poffo, to ringside. The match began with Savage fierce from the start. It wasn't long before Savage hit a double axe handle off the top rope onto Flair on the floor. Flair got his hands on Poffo, with Savage quick to break things up. The distraction allowed Flair to clip the knee of Savage and shift the momentum. Flair locked Savage in a figure 4 in the middle of the ring. While the referee attended to Savage, Flair held onto the ropes for added leverage. Savage fought through the pain and reversed the hold, with Flair ultimately breaking the hold. The battle raged on, with Savage taking the fight to the Nature Boy. Savage connected with a flying elbow drop off the top rope, but refused to go for the win. Instead, Savage grabbed the ring bell, which referee Randy Anderson quickly confiscated. Savage attempted a flying elbow drop to the floor, with Flair moving and Savage crashing against a steel guardrail. Hoffa used his cane to choke Flair, with the Nature Boy ultimately getting hold of the cane. Flair used the cane to bash Savage over the head and score the pinfall victory. The June 24th edition of Saturday Night featured a vignette from the Dungeon of Doom, where King Curtis gifted the Taskmaster with a monster to help him in his battle against Hulkamania. From the smoke emerged Kamala, who groaned and slapped his belly. The Taskmaster laughed maniacally as Kamala curled up next to King Curtis. The July 1st episode of Saturday Night featured a vignette beginning with a disheveled Dave Sullivan on a date, leaving the movie theater and out to a fancy restaurant. Kimberly taught a nervous Sullivan about proper table etiquette. Hopping to the table was the Disco Inferno, dressed like a bunny with a telegram for Dave. Since Dave couldn't read, Kimberly read it to herself, gasping. Disco revealed that it was a letter from DDP, and he said to enjoy the rabbit stew they were eating. A nervous Dave raced out of the restaurant into his car, where he thankfully found his pet rabbit safe and sound. DDP and Max Muscle ambushed Dave on the sidewalk, with the police breaking things up. From the dungeon, King Curtis presented the Taskmaster with his latest monster, the #1 contender to the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, Vader. In walked Vader, with Sullivan telling him their master plan to take out champion Hulk Hogan at the Bash at the Beach. Vader said, "I have the power, I feel nothing." The July 8th edition of Saturday Night featured another Dungeon of Doom vignette, where King Curtis presented the Taskmaster with another monster. From 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea came the Shark, who was the former Avalanche, dressed like a shark. The Shark emerged from a smoky doorway, repeating, "Shark attack." He said, "I rode a tidal wave from the South China Sea to Waikiki, and now I'm on your home turf." The Shark said, "My mouth has been watering for the taste of Hulkamania." The Taskmaster, the Shark, and King Curtis all laughed maniacally to end the segment. The July 15th episode of Saturday Night featured a Dungeon of Doom vignette, with King Curtis presenting the Taskmaster with another monster. This time, it was the man painted in zebra stripes, known as the Zodiac, who could only utter the words, yes and no. In reality, it was another wacky gimmick portrayed by Ed Leslie. The Nature Boy Ric Flair came to the ring in a suit, surrounded by a bevy of beautiful women that he said would be his lifeguards for Bash at the Beach. Flair took off his suit jacket and competed in an enhancement match until he was ambushed by an erratic Macho Man Randy Savage. The Nature Boy tried to escape, but the lifeguards pushed him back into reach of Savage, who continued to pummel him. Several wrestlers raced in to hold Savage back, with Flair attacking a restrained Macho Man. Once Flair escaped, Savage attacked each of the wrestlers that had restrained him. The July 16th episode of the main event doubled as a pre-show for the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view in Huntington Beach, California. Orange County Harley-Davidson presented the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan with a custom motorcycle. The presentation was interrupted by a giant man that walked up to Hogan, removed his shirt and threw it in the face of the Hulkster. The Giant left as a shaken Hogan and Jimmy Hart analyzed the shirt, with the Hulkster saying that it belonged to Andre. Bash at the Beach took place on July 16th from Huntington Beach, California, with a sea of fans as far as the eye could see, filling the beach for the pay-per-view event. In the opening match, the WCW United States Champion Sting battled Ming, who had Colonel Robert Parker in his corner. Ming used raw power to brutalize Sting, pummeling him around the ring with ease. The Stinger was resilient and ended up catching Ming off guard with a roll-up for the 3 count. Furious, Ming attacked Sting until Road Warrior Hawk came to the aid of the Stinger. Macho Man Randy Savage battled the Nature Boy Ric Flair in what was called a lifeguard match. Both wrestlers and female lifeguards surrounded the ring, with the match essentially being a lumberjack match. Both Savage and Flair took turns tossing one another out of the ring and into the sand, with the lifeguards tossing them back into the ring. Flair focused on the knees of Savage and applied the figure 4 leg lock in the middle of the ring. Savage reversed it, with Flair quick to break the hold. Things got out of hand, with the lifeguards fighting amongst themselves, which distracted the referee. This allowed Arn Anderson to sneak into the ring and drill Savage with a DDT. Flair made the cover, with Savage barely kicking out. Savage fought back and connected with a flying elbow drop to score a pinfall victory. In the main event, Hulk Hogan defended the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Vader in a steel cage match. In Hogan's corner was Jimmy Hart and NBA star Dennis Rodman, who wore the red and yellow. Both Hogan and Vader slugged it out and bounced each other off the cage in a hard-hitting battle. Hogan put on Vader's Mastodon helmet and connected with a headbutt. Vader responded by crushing Hogan with a Vader Bomb. A second Vader Bomb followed, with Hogan barely kicking out of a pinfall attempt. Vader hoisted Hogan over his shoulder and rammed him headfirst against the cage. Hogan fought back and body slammed Vader, but hurt his own back in the process. This allowed Vader to continue his beatdown and hit a big splash off the second rope. Hogan hulked up and tossed Vader repeatedly off the cage. A big boot followed, with Hogan gearing up for a leg drop. The Taskmaster and the Zodiac tried to break into the cage, but Dennis Rodman fought them off. Hogan hit Vader with a big leg drop and then began to climb the cage. Vader caught up with Hogan, where the two traded punches on the top rope. Hogan was successful in the exchange, causing Vader to crotch himself on the top rope. This allowed Hogan to climb out of the cage for the victory. After Hogan, Hart, and Rodman made their exit, the Nature Boy Ric Flair entered the cage to yell at Vader. Once Flair spit at him, Vader grabbed the Nature Boy by the throat. Arn Anderson saved Flair and dragged him away up the aisle. The July 22nd episode of Saturday Night saw Hulk Hogan enter the Dungeon of Doom. He comedically fell through a trap door and said, "Where am I? There's no Hulkamaniacs here. I've never been here before." Hogan reached into a water fountain to touch the water, acting like he got burned, but said, "It's not hot." King Curtis and the Taskmaster laughed, with an angry Hogan approaching them. The Taskmaster yelled back in Hogan's face, and said, "You're the one that's created me." He said that Hogan's demise was etched in stone, and then used his cane to tap on a tomb, which exploded. Out from the rubble emerged the Giant, who choked out Hogan. The Giant pointed to his palm and said, "My power is 100 times greater than the power of Hulkamania. I am the greatest giant to ever walk the face of the earth, and I am the one true immortal." The Giant and the Taskmaster laughed maniacally to end the segment. After winning an enhancement match, Arn Anderson joined the Nature Boy Ric Flair for an interview with Mean Gene in front of the entrance stage. Flair began to talk trash about Vader, who quickly made his way to the scene. Anderson stepped up to protect Flair, with the locker room emptying to hold back an angry Vader. The July 29th edition of Saturday Night saw the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan give a serious interview from a dark room. Hogan talked about how much he missed Andre the Giant getting choked up. He talked about wrestling Andre in the Pontiac Silverdome and thought that the fans should have been chanting for the Giant instead of booing him. Hogan said he got lucky that night. He said that when Andre was buried, there was a piece of Hogan that went with him. Hogan talked about the new Giant that has been haunting the Hulkster. He held up the Giant shirt, saying he feels Andre's presence. Hogan said that this Giant was Andre's son, coming to test the power of Hulkamania. He said that the shirt that the Giant threw at him actually belonged to Andre. Hogan said that he'll go through every member of the Dungeon of Doom just to get his hands on the Giant. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair defeated Marcus Bagwell, but there wasn't any time to celebrate. Vader attacked Flair, causing Arn Anderson to race in and shoulder tackle Vader's legs. Anderson followed it up by spiking Vader with a DDT. Flair and Anderson pounded on Vader and then raced away to avoid any repercussions. Collision in Korea aired on August 4th on pay-per-view, featuring matches taped on April 28th and 29th in Pyongyang, North Korea. The first night was attended by 150,000 people, while the second night had 165,000 people in attendance. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair battled Japanese legend and New Japan Pro Wrestling founder Antonio Inoki. Both men battled back and forth, starting out as a technical mat war until the fight spilled to the floor and Flair sent Inoki crashing against a steel ring post. Back in the ring, Flair wore down the left knee of Inoki and then applied the figure 4 leg lock in the middle of the ring. Inoki made it to the ropes to break the hold, with Flair dragging him to the middle of the ring and attempting to reapply the hold. Instead, Inoki rolled up Flair with an inside cradle for a 2 count. Inoki used a backslide to pin Flair, but again only got a 2 count. Flair attempted a chop, but Inoki blocked it and charged at the Nature Boy with right hands. Inoki Irish whipped Flair into the corner, causing him to flop over the top rope and stumble to the floor. Flair climbed to the top rope, but Inoki tossed him off with a big slam. Inoki connected with a dropkick and made the cover, with Flair kicking out at 2. They slugged it out back and forth until Flair connected with a back suplex and Inoki kicking out at 2. Out of nowhere, Inoki connected with a cartwheel kick and then leaped off the top rope, landing on Flair with a high knee. In the middle of the ring, Inoki hit Flair with an enziguri and scored the pinfall victory. Following the bout, Inoki greeted fans around ringside until Flair whipped him around. Flair shook the hand of Inoki, but also gave him a cold stare before making his exit. The August 5th episode of Saturday Night saw Mean Gene interview the Nature Boy Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. Flair called out Vader, lying on the ground just to entice Vader to come out. He said that the reason Vader wasn't coming out was because Anderson was there to watch his back. Flair hyped the upcoming handicap match the two would have against Vader the next night at the Clash of the Champions. The August 6th edition of the main event saw Hulk Hogan defend the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Kamala, who had the Taskmaster in his corner. Jimmy Hart accompanied Hogan, who donned face paint like Kamala. The Taskmaster interfered, using his staff to choke Hogan behind the referee's back. This allowed Kamala to connect with a big splash, only for Hogan to kick out of a pinfall attempt and Hulk up. Hogan hit a big boot and then a leg drop, causing the Taskmaster to climb to the top rope. The Hulkster broke his pinfall attempt and slammed the Taskmaster all the way to the canvas below. Both the Shark and the Zodiac raced in, with Sting and Macho Man Randy Savage close behind to even the odds. The Dungeon of Doom retreated, with Hogan, Savage, and Sting left standing tall. The Clash of the Champions took place on the same night and saw the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, Hulk Hogan, enter the Dungeon of Doom. Hogan confronted the Taskmaster, demanding that the other members of the faction face him. He called out the Giant and said, "Only Hulkamania will live forever." The Giant whipped Hogan around and ripped the crucifix right off his neck, throwing it to the ground. He then began to choke Hogan, whose knees soon gave out. The rest of the dungeon members ganged up on Hogan until Vader ran in to make the save. Vader and the Giant stared one another in the eyes, while Macho Man Randy Savage, Sting, and Jimmy Hart dragged Hogan away to safety. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair and Arn Anderson battled Vader in a handicap match. Anderson did most of the heavy lifting, wearing down Vader and even planting him with a spinebuster. Once Flair tagged in, Vader mauled him and then connected with a big splash off the top rope, with Anderson breaking up a pinfall attempt. Vader powerbombed Anderson and scored the pinfall victory. Flair had a tantrum, yelling at Anderson in his face for taking the pin. Just when Flair tried to walk away, Anderson dragged him back to the middle of the ring by the hair. Wide-eyed, Flair retreated. In front of the big screen, Mean Gene interviewed the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, Hulk Hogan, who was backed by Sting, Macho Man Randy Savage, and Jimmy Hart. Hogan clutched his crucifix and said, "The last time this crucifix was torn off my body, brother, I beat Andre the Giant. Now, brother, someday I'll face his son." he declared war on the Dungeon of Doom, but wanted to know whose side Vader was on. Out came Vader, who got in Hogan's face and said that nobody tells him what time it is. The August 12th edition of Saturday Night featured footage of Hulk Hogan waiting in the locker room of Vader, with a nervous Mean Gene there to witness the impending confrontation. Vader wasn't receptive, saying he wants the gold around Hogan's waist. Hogan asked Vader to be in his team for War Games, and afterwards they can discuss a title shot. Vader accepted. The August 19th episode of Saturday Night featured a Dungeon of Doom vignette, with King Curtis presenting the Taskmaster with a new warrior, Ming. Out from the smoke came Ming, who wore a giant dragon helmet with smoke shooting from its nostrils. The August 26th edition of Saturday Night featured a studio interview with Arn Anderson, who claimed that Nature Boy Ric Flair has taken him for granted. Anderson said he's not going to put up with Flair's antics anymore, and hyped their upcoming match at Fall Brawl. Mean Gene interviewed Nature Boy Ric Flair at the entrance stage, with Flair reminiscing about his history with Arn Anderson. He said that Anderson was by his side all those years for a reason, but they'd settle their issues in the ring. Flair said that he's got something to prove to Anderson at Fall Brawl. The first ever episode of Monday Nitro took place on September 4th from the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Eric Bischoff welcomed the fans to the show, introducing football great Steve Mongo McMichael as his broadcast partner. Bobby the Brain Heenan, the third man in the booth, immediately began to bicker back and forth with McMichael. In the opening match, Flying Brian Pillman battled his longtime rival, Jushin Thunder Liger, in a fast-paced bout. Liger displayed his aerial skills in the opening minutes, gaining an early advantage. Pillman countered with a flying head scissors, with Heenan on commentary saying he whipped him from Bloomingdale's to Macy's and back. Liger shifted the momentum and hoisted Pillman up for a surfboard submission. A wary Pillman charged at Liger, who dodged him and pulled down the top rope, sending Pillman tumbling to the floor. Liger ran off the apron, landing on Pillman with a somersault plancha to the concrete floor. Pillman retaliated by diving off the top rope, connecting with a high cross body onto Liger. Back in the ring, Liger hit Pillman with a superplex all the way to the canvas for a 2 count. Liger leaped off the top rope, with Pillman connecting with a missile dropkick to the face for a 2 count. They shifted momentum, and Liger planted Pillman with a Liger bomb, again only for a 2 count. Liger then hit Pillman with a Frankensteiner off the top rope, but Pillman again kicked out. Heenan said, "And that's without pads or a helmet, McMichael." Pillman battled back, drilling Liger with a tornado DDT off the second rope. Moments later, Pillman rolled up Liger and scored the pinfall victory. Following the bell, Pillman shook Liger's hand and raised his arm in the air in a sign of good sportsmanship. Footage was shown of Eric Bischoff at the grand opening of Hulk Hogan's Pasta Mania, which was inside the Mall of America. Bischoff trudged through the massive amount of fans to catch up with the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, with an excited Hogan hyping his upcoming match against Big Bubba Rogers. Hogan ended his promo by saying, What you gonna do when the Mall of America, brother? When Hulk Hogan, Pasta Mania, and all my Pasta Maniacs run wild on you? The WCW United States Champion Sting battled the Nature Boy Ric Flair, but the bigger story was the appearance of the total package Lex Luger, who was thought to still be working for the WWF. Luger looked on as Sting and Flair battled it out in the ring, bringing the fans to their feet. Sting tossed Flair around the ring and attempted a big splash off the top rope. Arn Anderson walked to ringside just as Flair rolled out of the way and Sting crashed to the canvas. The Stinger was unfazed, mowing down Flair with a series of clotheslines. Sting superplexed Flair off the top rope and crashing to the mat. The sight of Anderson distracted Sting and allowed Flair to apply the figure 4 leg lock. Anderson entered the ring to cause a disqualification and began brawling with Flair. The fight spilled to the floor, where security broke things up. Scott Flash Norton stormed the broadcast booth, putting his hands on Eric Bischoff and demanding a contract. McMichael got in the face of Norton, with the two behemoths jaw-jacking. Macho Man Randy Savage whipped Norton around, with the two ready for a match. Security stepped in to break things up, with Bischoff demanding that Norton be removed. A hype video aired for new WCW wrestler Sabu, with a montage of high-flying moves flashing on the screen. The man formerly known as Mike Rotunda returned as the wealthy VK Wall Street. He said he wasn't concerned with the IRS keeping their eyes on him, and instead put the competition in WCW on notice. WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan battled Big Bubba Rogers in a back-and-forth brawl. In the end, Hogan connected with a big boot and a leg drop, pinning Bubba cleanly for the victory. The Dungeon of Doom raced in to ambush Hogan, with Lex Luger hopping in to fend them off. Hogan wasn't pleased, getting in Luger's face and saying, "Why don't you go back to where you came from?" Sting and Macho Man Randy Savage got between the two, with an irate Hogan letting his anger out on Luger. After a commercial break, Mean Gene entered the ring, where Hogan and Luger were still arguing back and forth. Luger said, "I am sick and tired of playing around with kids. I'm here to get it on with the big boys, and that means you." Hogan held up the World Championship, saying, "I'm the champion, and that's the way it's gonna stay, forever and a day." The Hulkster said he knows the games Luger has had to play, and he's willing to put the title on the line next week in Miami. Luger shook Hogan's hand, with a shoving match ensuing, and Sting and Savage prying them apart. The September 9th edition of Saturday Night featured a Dungeon of Doom vignette, where the Taskmaster and King Curtis marveled over their collection of monsters: Ming, Kamala, the Shark, and the Zodiac. This would be the team going into battle against Hogan's army inside War Games, with the Taskmaster saying, "The army of doom awaits you." King Curtis repeated, "Destroy Hulkamania." A vignette aired to hype the debut of the Disco Inferno, who showcased his dance moves. Disco said, "Everybody's got boogie fever now that Disco Inferno is here." Mean Gene interviewed the Taskmaster, only to be interrupted by the United States champions Sting and Macho Man Randy Savage. Sullivan asked Sting and Savage if they could really trust Vader, since he's only teaming with them so he can get a world title shot. Out came Vader, with a paranoid Savage and Sting asking where Vader stands. Not playing into the antics of the Taskmaster, Vader said he had their backs inside War Games. The September 11th episode of Monday Nitro took place in Miami and began with an announcement from Eric Bischoff saying that Vader was gone and Hulk Hogan's team for War Games was down one man. In the opening match, Sabu made his debut, taking on Das Wunderkind, Alex Wright. Sabu was intense, showcasing his unique moves to gain an early advantage. Diving over the top rope, Sabu landed on Wright with a somersault plancha to the floor. Sabu launched himself off a chair, flying towards Wright, who was propped up against a steel guardrail. Wright moved, with Sabu smashing against the steel guardrail. Back in the ring, Wright soared off the top rope, connecting with a missile dropkick that sent Sabu tumbling to the floor. They battled to the top rope, where Wright hit Sabu with a superplex all the way to the canvas below. Wright connected with a German suplex, with Sabu barely kicking out. They battled to the top rope, where Sabu hit a rolling victory roll to the canvas and scored the pinfall victory. Sabu continued his assault on Wright and set him up on a table outside the ring. Launching off the top rope, Sabu hit Wright with a high cross body that sent them both crashing through the table. The decision was reversed, with Wright awarded the victory by disqualification. In the ring, Mean Gene interviewed Nature Boy Ric Flair, who hyped his upcoming match with Arn Anderson at Fall Brawl. Flair said that he and Anderson used to rule the world and held up 4 fingers. He said that it didn't stand for the 4 horsemen, but rather the symbol of excellence. Lex Luger interrupted, with Flair gushing over him to the point of embarrassment. Flair said that Luger would defeat Hulk Hogan in the main event. As Sting made his entrance, Eric Bischoff gave out Raw spoilers on commentary. Bischoff said, "By the way, in case you're tempted to grab the remote control, check out the competition, don't bother. It's 2 or 3 weeks old. Shawn Michaels beat the big guy with a super kick he couldn't earn a green belt with at the local YMCA. Stay right here, it's live, it's where the action is." Sting went on to defeat VK Wall Street with a high cross body. Macho Man Randy Savage battled Scott Flash Norton in a wild bout. Savage dove off the top rope, with Norton snatching him in midair and squeezing him with a bear hug. Norton focused on the back, slamming Savage forcefully to the mat with a powerbomb. Savage barely kicked out of a pinfall attempt at 2. Norton planted Savage with a power slam, with Savage again kicking out of a pinfall attempt. A vicious DDT off the top rope followed, with Norton spiking Savage head first into the mat. Norton leaped off the top rope, with Savage ramming him head first into the mat. Savage battled back, causing the Shark and Kamala to race in. The Shark hopped onto the apron, where Savage Irish whipped Norton with the 2 behemoths colliding. This caused an unconscious Shark to fall on top of Norton's legs, leaving him prone for a flying elbow drop from Savage for a pinfall victory. The Dungeon of Doom raced in, with Savage quickly retreating. Norton stood up to the Dungeon, who retreated. In the main event, Hulk Hogan put the WCW World Heavyweight Championship on the line against Lex Luger. Hogan showed off his technical abilities, sending Luger crashing face first onto the canvas with a drop toe hold, followed by a half Nelson armbar into a front face lock. A snap suplex followed, but Luger bounced to his feet before Hogan did. Luger suplexed Hogan, with the Hulkster bouncing to his feet before Luger. The Total Package tried to escape, but Hogan chased after him, throwing Luger back into the ring. Luger shifted the momentum and hoisted Hogan up for the torture rack. Referee Randy Anderson lifted Hogan's arm 3 times to see if there was life left in him. Luger prematurely broke the move, thinking he'd won the match. Angry, Luger went for the pin, but Hogan kicked out with authority and hulked up. Hogan punched Luger in the face 3 times, hit the big boot to the face, and connected with the leg drop. Suddenly, the Dungeon of Doom raced in to attack Hogan and cause a disqualification. Sting and Macho Man Randy Savage raced in to fend off the Dungeon of Doom and send them retreating. Just when things calmed down, Hogan and Luger began to shove one another back and forth, with Sting and Savage getting between them. After a commercial break, Mean Gene entered the ring to interview Hogan, who asked Luger why the Dungeon of Doom didn't lay a hand on him. Hogan said, "Whose side are you on, brother?" Savage repeated those sentiments, but Sting stood up for Luger. Sting said that this was the team, but Savage was vehemently against the idea. The Stinger said that the point was to win War Games, and voted for Luger to be on the team. A paranoid Savage asked why nobody attacked Jimmy Hart either, with Hart pleading his case. After all this, Hogan asked Sting, "Are you saying that we should let Lex Luger take Vader's place in War Games?" Hogan had the final vote and officially offered Luger a spot on their team. Luger said he'd join the team, but wanted a rematch after Fall Brawl. Savage still said that Luger couldn't be trusted. The September 17th episode of the main event was the lead-in to the pay-per-view, and saw Hulk Hogan arrive to the arena on a Harley-Davidson. A slew of fans were there to greet the Hulkster, as well as Mean Gene, who conducted a quick interview. They were interrupted by a monster truck that sped down the road, causing the fans, Gene, and Hogan to flee. The monster truck crushed Hogan's motorcycle, backing up and crushing it over and over again. Driving the monster truck was the Giant, who laughed maniacally. Hogan threw his helmet at the monster truck and pounded on the doors as the Giant continued to crack up. Fall Brawl took place on September 17th from Asheville, North Carolina, and began with Flyin' Brian Pillman against Johnny B. Bad to determine the #1 contender to the United States Championship. An exciting bout ensued, with the two trading pinfall attempts in the early minutes. They countered one another's holds, with a bout featuring mat-based work in the early portion of the bout. Pillman showed a more aggressive side, busting open Bad and slapping him around and taking cheap shots. Just as Bad gained the advantage, a frustrated Pillman left the ring to walk up the aisle. Pillman returned and tried to shake Bad's hand, but Johnny wanted none of it. The battle continued, with the two colliding in midair. Both men staggered to their feet, only for Pillman to headbutt Bad, causing both to fall back to the mat. Both men again beat the referee's 10 count and continued battling. Bad suplexed Pillman over the top rope and to the concrete floor. As Pillman rose to his feet, Bad crashed onto him with a dive to the floor. Back in the ring, Bad leaped off the top rope, but Pillman caught him with a dropkick to the face. Bad fought back and planted Pillman with a powerbomb for a 2 count. Pillman drilled Bad with a tombstone piledriver, only for a 2 count. Bad countered a tornado DDT off the second rope, tossing Pillman across the ring. Pillman fought back and hit Bad with a Russian leg sweep and an abdominal stretch on the mat. They battled back to their feet, where Bad caught Pillman with the Tutti Frutti, a right-hand punch to the face. Bad made the cover, but Pillman was too close to the ropes. Pillman sprung off the top rope with the flying clothesline he calls Air Pillman and covered Bad, but only got a 2 count. Seconds later, the 20-minute time limit expired. Referee Nick Patrick said that there must be a winner, with the match going into sudden death overtime. Pillman took the fight to the floor, Irish whipping Bad against a steel guardrail. Back in the ring, Pillman leaped off the top rope with a missile dropkick, but Bad met him with a dropkick of his own, with both men colliding in the air. Pillman took Bad to the mat with a sleeper hold, but Bad battled out of it and locked in a sleeper of his own. A back suplex followed, with Pillman sending Bad crashing to the mat to break the hold. Pillman put Bad on the top rope and slapped him across the face. This woke Bad up, knocking Pillman to the mat and leaping off the top rope with a sunset flip to roll up Pillman. Pillman barely kicked out. Bad went for a powerbomb, but Pillman reversed it with a Frankensteiner for a 2 count. Pillman attempted a crucifix pin, but Bad reversed it with a Samoan drop. He made the cover, but only got a 2 count. Bad hit a Frankensteiner off the second rope and made the cover. Pillman kicked out and then planted Bad with a tornado DDT. Bad kicked out at 2. Pillman climbed to the top rope, but Bad bounced off the ropes, causing Pillman to crouch himself on the top turnbuckle. Bad tossed Pillman off the top rope, landing face first on a steel guardrail on the floor. Leaping over the top rope, Bad landed on the shoulder of Pillman with the Bad Mood. They battled back into the ring, where a frustrated Pillman suplexed Bad, stomach first, onto the top rope. Pillman ran across the ring and dove through the ropes, colliding with Bad on the floor. Back in the ring, both men again collided in midair with high cross body blocks. Bad landed on top of Pillman and scored a fluke pinfall victory to become the number 1 contender to the United States Championship. Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff threw things around his dressing room, angry about his recent losing streak and wondering if he really was wonderful. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, with television psychic Gary Spivey walking in. Comedically, Orndorff said, "Gary Spivey of the Psychic Companions Network, what are you doing here?" Spivey said that he had a vision that Orndorff wasn't okay, but had some encouraging news for him. He said, "You are Mr. Wonderful. They call you Mr. Wonderful." Spivey had Orndorff look in a mirror and reminded him that he is, indeed, wonderful. Orndorff repeated, "I am Mr. Wonderful." He began to kiss his own arms, with Spivey continuing his words of encouragement. With the Diamond Doll and Max Muscle in his corner, Diamond Dallas Page defeated the Renegade with a Diamond Cutter to become the new WCW Television Champion. Colonel Robert Parker's team of Bunkhouse Buck and Dirty Dick Slater defended the WCW World Tag Team Championships against Harlem Heat, who were accompanied by Sister Sherry. While both teams battered one another in one ring, Parker and Sherry expressed their love for one another in Ring 2, engaging in a passionate kiss. The Nasty Boys interfered, bashing Slater over the head with his own cowboy boot. Booker T made the cover, scoring the pinfall victory, with Harlem Heat winning the WCW World Tag Team Championships. In a battle of two former best friends, Arn Anderson battled the Nature Boy Ric Flair. They took the fight to the mat, where Anderson out-wrestled Flair. The Nature Boy caught Anderson off guard with a thunderous chop to the chest. Anderson shifted things back in his favor, leaping off the second rope and connecting with a high knee to the back of Flair. Grabbing onto Flair's arm, Anderson rammed it against a steel ring post. A single-arm DDT followed, with Anderson then wrenching away at the injured left arm of Flair. Anderson charged, but Flair pulled down the top rope, causing Anderson to tumble out of the ring and crashing onto the concrete floor. Flair dove off the top rope, connecting with a double axe handle to the forehead of Anderson on the floor. Back inside the ring, Flair connected with a running knee drop to the forehead of Anderson. Still, Anderson battled back with multiple near falls. A desperate Flair struck Anderson with a low blow to swing the momentum back in his favor. Back on the floor, Flair struck Anderson with a chop to the chest. Moments later, Anderson hit Flair with a backdrop onto the concrete floor. Flair reversed a vertical suplex, causing Anderson to smash onto the floor. Back in the ring, Flair hit Anderson with another vertical suplex for a 2 count. Anderson fought back and went for a DDT, but Flair held onto the top rope, causing Anderson to crash onto the canvas. Flair climbed to the top rope, but Anderson sent him crashing to the canvas with a press slam. Anderson leaped off the second rope, but Flair caught him with a clothesline to the face. Flair then applied the figure 4 leg lock in the middle of the ring, with Anderson shaking it off and reversing the hold. After breaking the hold, Flair went right back for it, but Anderson rolled him up with an inside cradle for a 2 count. Flair backed Anderson into a corner and punched him repeatedly with right hands to the face. Suddenly, Flying Brian Pillman hopped onto the ring apron and punched Flair in the face. Flair punched back, causing Pillman to kick him in the back of the head. Anderson drilled Flair with a DDT and scored the pinfall victory. A vignette aired narrated by the Taskmaster, who was standing in front of a cage and hyping the upcoming battle between the Dungeon of Doom and the Hulkamaniacs. The Taskmaster cut a promo on Hogan, saying, "You and I can't coexist in this planet." He laughed maniacally and held up a bushel of dead posies. Sullivan ripped off the remaining pedals, saying, "We love you not. Actually, we hate your guts, and we hate you." The bizarre segment continued, with the Taskmaster using an axe to pummel an original San Francisco toymaker's Hulk Hogan action figure. He again laughed maniacally and said, "My heart goes out to you." In the main event, the Hulkamaniacs battled the Dungeon of Doom inside War Games. Sting and the Shark brawled it out in the initial 5-minute period. The Stinger showed tremendous strength, body slamming the much larger Shark. He tried it again, with his knees giving out and the Shark crashing on top of his chest. The Shark attempted to dive over both sets of ring ropes, but didn't quite make it, with his large frame draped across both rings. With the Shark hung up, Sting punted him 3 times in the belly. Sting then dove over one set of ropes, but the Shark caught him and threw him back into the ring from which he came. Just when Sting applied the Scorpion Deathlock, the coin toss took place, with the Dungeon of Doom winning and the Zodiac racing in. A 2-on-1 beatdown ensued until Macho Man Randy Savage raced in to even the odds. Kamala was the next person to join the fray, followed by Lex Luger, who accidentally hit Savage. This caused Savage to explode, attacking Luger, with Sting separating the two. Ming was the final entrant for his team, and the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan was the final person to enter. Hogan tossed powder into the eyes of his opponents and cleaned house. He punched the Zodiac in the face, bouncing him off one set of ropes and bouncing back, with Hogan repeatedly punching him. Hogan locked the Zodiac in a camel clutch and won the match by submission. Per the rules, the Taskmaster was supposed to get 5 minutes alone inside the cage with Hogan. The Taskmaster tried to retreat, but head of security Doug Dillinger and Sting dragged him back inside the cage. Hogan bounced the Taskmaster off the walls of the cage. This caused the Giant to march down the aisle, toss the referee aside, and enter the cage. The Giant began to choke Hogan, bringing the champion to his knees. In a brutal moment, the Giant wrenched at Hogan's neck, with the Hulkamaniacs running back in just a little too late. As Hogan received medical attention, the Giant marched away with the Taskmaster. The September 18th episode of Monday Nitro saw Harlem Heat put the WCW World Tag Team Championships on the line against the American Males, Marcus Bagwell and Scotty Riggs. Sister Sherri attempted to interfere, but was distracted by Colonel Robert Parker, who'd come to ringside. While Sherri made out with Parker, Bagwell scored the pinfall victory, with the American Males crowned the new Tag Team Champions. Footage was shown of the Macho Man Randy Savage lifting weights on a bench press while on a break from filming Baywatch. The Taskmaster interrupted, pressing the barbell up against the chest of Savage and then knocking him off the bench. Nature Boy Ric Flair raced to Savage's aid, with the Taskmaster retreating. In the ring, Mean Gene interviewed the Macho Man Randy Savage, who made a bold prediction. Savage said that the 3 newest members of the Dungeon of Doom would be Lex Luger, Jimmy Hart, and Sting. Out came Luger, who accused Savage of being jealous of him. Savage accused Luger of cheap-shotting him in War Games and challenged him to a match. Luger remained stoic until Savage slapped him across the face, and the show went to a commercial. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair faced Flyin' Brian Pillman. On commentary, Eric Bischoff commented on the new attitude of Pillman, guessing it must be from the influence of Arn Anderson. Meanwhile, Flair applied the figure 4 leg lock in the middle of the ring, with Pillman submitting. Following the bout, Flair challenged Arn Anderson to face him next week. The September 25th edition of Monday Nitro saw the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan cut a promo from the locker room. Wearing a neck brace and backed by Jimmy Hart, Hogan challenged the Giant to face him at Halloween Havoc in a monster truck battle and a championship match afterwards. Mean Gene interviewed Macho Man Randy Savage in the ring. Lex Luger interrupted, saying that Savage lacks respect and common sense. Luger challenged Savage to face him next week, and if Luger loses, he'll leave WCW. In the ring, Mean Gene interviewed Arn Anderson and Flyin' Brian Pillman, who talked trash about the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Anderson talked about his victory at Fall Brawl against Flair, saying, "The better man won." Macho Man Randy Savage battled the Taskmaster, ultimately ending once the Zodiac interfered, and Savage shoved the referee. The Giant marched to the ring and chokeslammed Savage, with members of the locker room racing in an attempt to restore order. One by one, the Giant chokeslammed them all. Lex Luger entered the ring and stood over the hurt body of Savage. The Giant snatched up Luger and planted him with a chokeslam. An angry Taskmaster scolded the Giant and dragged him away. The September 30th episode of Saturday Night was supposed to feature Johnny B. Bad getting his shot at the United States Championship, but when his music played, he was nowhere to be found. Flyin' Brian Pillman interrupted Mean Gene, saying that Bad was scared. A second attempt was made later in the show, with Bad still missing. Sting didn't want to win by forfeit, so he agreed to wait longer. Pillman proposed that he get the title shot, and with Bad absent, it would be Sting and Pillman in the main event. The match took place, with Sting out-wrestling Pillman and scoring the pinfall victory. Following the match, Mean Gene interviewed Sting, only to be interrupted by the Nature Boy Ric Flair, who said that he wanted Sting to be his partner at Halloween Havoc to face Arn Anderson and Brian Pillman. Sting wasn't interested. A vignette aired featuring Dean Malenko, who discussed the death of his father, the great Boris Malenko. He discussed his experience wrestling in Japan and named multiple junior heavyweights he liked to compete against. Malenko discussed his rivalry with Eddie Guerrero and said he was excited to bring the feud to WCW. Johnny B. Bad arrived at the end of the show, telling Mean Gene that he had gotten a flat tire. The WCW World Television Champion, Diamond Dallas Page, interrupted, with the Diamond Doll and Max Muscle in tow. DDP mocked Bad for squandering his title opportunity, with Muscle adding that it must have been tough to get there with 4 flat tires. Bad got angry, saying that he only mentioned 1 flat tire, not 4. Realizing he'd been sabotaged, Bad lunged at DDP and Muscle to end the broadcast. The October 2nd episode of Monday Nitro began with Macho Man Randy Savage against Lex Luger. With the referee knocked out, the Giant interfered, chokeslamming Savage. This allowed Luger to hoist Savage up in the torture rack and pick up a victory by referee stoppage. Former ECW rivals Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko brought their feud to WCW, with the two engaging in a fast-paced bout. During the match, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan arrived to the arena in a limo. A frantic Jimmy Hart tried warning a neck brace wearing Hogan about the destruction of the Giant, but the Hulkster was adamant about confronting the big man. We cut back to the action in the ring, where Guerrero flew from the top rope, crashing against Malenko in the aisle in a jaw-dropping spot. Back in the ring, Guerrero rolled up Malenko and scored the pinfall victory. Malenko confronted Guerrero after the bell, saying he wanted one more match. Guerrero accepted the challenge. In the ring, Mean Gene interviewed the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, Hulk Hogan, who was accompanied by Jimmy Hart. Hogan tore off his shirt and said that he was going to go backstage to confront the Giant. As Hogan greeted the fans around ringside, what seemed to be an old woman covered in a shawl threw powder in the eyes of the Hulkster. The Giant and the Zodiac marched to the ring, where the old woman removed the disguise to reveal the Taskmaster, who pounded on Hogan. Ripping off Hogan's neck brace, the Giant twisted the Hulkster's neck. This allowed the Taskmaster to shave off the mustache of an unconscious Hogan. Both the WCW World Tag Team Champions, the American Males, and the Nasty Boys raced to the ring, but got taken down by chokeslams from the Giant. The Taskmaster cut off Hogan's hair until paramedics entered the ring to attend to an injured Hulk Hogan, among other victims. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair battled Arn Anderson, with Flying Brian Pillman interfering, hitting Flair with a big splash off the top rope to cause a disqualification. A 2-on-1 beatdown ensued on Flair, with the Nature Boy left battered and bruised. The October 7th edition of Saturday Night saw Eddie Guerrero battle Dean Malenko. They battled back and forth in a largely submission-based bout. Malenko spiked Guerrero with a brainbuster and made the cover, with Guerrero kicking out at 2. Guerrero reversed a tombstone piledriver, planting Malenko head first onto the canvas. He then dove off the top rope, connecting with a frog splash on Malenko, but only for a 2 count. Both men traded pinfall attempts at a rapid pace until Malenko suplexed Guerrero over the top rope and onto the concrete floor. Malenko dove over the top rope, but Guerrero casually dodged the move. Guerrero dove off the top rope, hitting Malenko with a bulldog to the floor. Malenko superplexed Guerrero back into the ring, and then hit him with a Tiger Bomb soon after to score a pinfall victory. The October 9th episode of Monday Nitro saw Sabu in action against newcomer Mr. JL in a high-impact match. Both competitors flew through the air, with both displaying their high-flying arsenal. Sabu dove over the top rope, crashing onto Mr. JL with a somersault plancha to the floor. Launching himself off a chair, Sabu crashed against JL, who was propped up against a steel guardrail. Back in the ring, JL took Sabu down with a German suplex for a 2 count. JL Irish whipped Sabu into a corner and drop-kicked him in the face. Sabu recovered, hitting JL with a Hindu press and then briefly locking in the camel clutch. JL caught Sabu off guard and DDT'd him off the top turnbuckle for a 2 count. Sabu caught JL in midair with a powerbomb and then locked in the camel clutch to pick up a victory by submission. The brawling continued after the bell, with Sabu hitting a sunset flip powerbomb to send JL crashing backwards onto the concrete floor. Mean Gene stood in the ring with a microphone with the United States champion Sting attempting to mend fences between Lex Luger and Macho Man Randy Savage. Things were tense, with a paranoid Savage asking Sting why the Giant hadn't chokeslammed him. Sting proposed that if Savage and Luger win their matches at Halloween Havoc, they can then face one another to determine the number one contender. Luger initially scoffed at the idea, with Sting saying he was sick of sticking up for Luger. After further pressure, Luger accepted the challenge. A limo arrived outside the arena, with Chris Benoit stepping out. He looked around and said, "WCW, where the big boys play." In the ring, Mean Gene interviewed the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, Hulk Hogan, who dressed in all black, right down to the neck brace. He was backed by Jimmy Hart, who also dressed in all black. Hogan said that he's going to play by the Dungeon of Doom's rules now. He challenged the Giant to face him in the ring, with Gene revealing that wasn't possible since there was a restraining order preventing the Giant from being there. Hogan said, "A long time ago, brother, in the New York City area, brother, when Hulkamania was running wild, the promoter's ego got bigger than the wrestling business. And as Hulk Hogan pulled his troops out, the red and yellow little Hulksters a couple years down the road, as we speak, that promoter is dying and choking on his own ego." He talked about Hulkamania running wild in WCW and hyped his upcoming confrontation with the Giant at Halloween Havoc. Suddenly, the Dungeon of Doom arrived to the arena, with the Giant driving a monster truck up to the back door. Hogan raced out of the ring, saying he was going to bring the fight to the Giant. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair battled Arn Anderson in a steel cage match. Both men bounced one another back and forth off the walls of the cage. Flying Brian Pillman interfered, climbing up the side of the cage until Flair knocked him off with a chop to the chest. Flair attempted to apply the figure 4, but Anderson used brass knuckles to punch the Nature Boy in the face and score the pinfall victory. Racing to the broadcast booth, an irate Flair ripped the headset off of Eric Bischoff and challenged Anderson and Pillman to face him next week. The October 14th edition of Saturday Night featured footage from earlier in the day on WCW Pro. In the ring, Tony Schiavone interviewed the Nature Boy Ric Flair, who continued to campaign to have Sting be his tag team partner. Out came the United States champion Sting, who once again said no. Flair brought out a group of kids who all had Sting face paint on. The kids cheered on Sting, who didn't take kindly to Flair using children to make him feel bad. Reluctantly, Sting agreed to be Flair's partner, but said, "If you swerve me in the slightest little bit, sometime down the line, Halloween Havoc for starters, I'm gonna leave you for dead." After winning an enhancement match, Arn Anderson and Flying Brian Pillman joined Mean Gene for an interview. Pillman said that even with Sting as a partner, Nature Boy Ric Flair is a shell of his former self. Anderson said, "Flair, on paper, you and Sting might be the best team there's ever been. On paper." But Anderson said that he and Pillman have momentum on their side and hyped their upcoming tag team match on Nitro. The October 16th edition of Monday Nitro featured a bout between Eddie Guerrero and the crippler Chris Benoit. An exciting bout ensued, with the two showcasing their excellent technical and high-flying skills. Guerrero dove off the top rope, crashing down onto Benoit with a high cross body. They battled back into the ring until Benoit backdropped Guerrero over the top rope, with both men tumbling to the floor. Guerrero attempted a clothesline, but Benoit moved, with Guerrero crashing against a steel guardrail. Benoit dragged a hurt Guerrero into the ring, planting him with a back body drop onto the injured shoulder. He continued to systematically wear down Guerrero until Guerrero sprung off the second rope and spiked Benoit with a tornado DDT. Guerrero didn't maintain the advantage long, with his hurt arm dragging him down. Both men traded chops until Benoit took down Guerrero with a scoop slam. Guerrero sprung off the top rope from a knuckle lock and took down Benoit with a flying head scissors for a 2 count. He followed it up by planting Benoit with a high back suplex onto the back of his head. Guerrero dove off the top rope with a beautiful frog splash, but Benoit pulled his knees up to provide a harsh landing. Benoit took down Guerrero with a vicious powerbomb that caused whiplash on impact. He attempted another, but Guerrero wiggled free. Benoit snatched Guerrero up and hit him with a full Nelson suplex in the middle of the ring for a pinfall victory. The WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan cut a promo, with Jimmy Hart behind him, clutching the title belt. Both were dressed in all black, with Hogan saying, "Now everybody knows the evil within Hulk Hogan is real. Now everybody knows the things Kevin Sullivan has told you about me are real, brother." Hogan said he was going to protect the training, the prayers, and the vitamins. He said that the Giant doesn't realize the true power of Hulkamania. Hogan hyped his upcoming match at Halloween Havoc against the Giant, saying, "What he doesn't realize is once I lock up with him in the Motor City, the test that I put to his father when I slammed him in front of 94,000 people is nothing compared to what I'm going to do to him, man." He said that the Giant was treading on his turf, and the stage was set for the ultimate showdown. Jimmy Hart said that he was worried, with Hogan warning him not to interfere. Hogan hyped the in-ring bout between the two, saying, "It's you and me, brother, fighting eye to eye for the destiny of wrestling, brother." He closed by saying, "So what you gonna do, Big Stinky Giant and Kevin Sullivan, when the shadow, the darkness, the evil of Hulkamania gouges you?" In the main event, Arn Anderson and Flyin' Brian Pillman faced the Nature Boy Ric Flair, with the United States Champion Sting nowhere to be found. Flair held his own and applied the figure 4 leg lock on Anderson in the middle of the ring. Pillman flew off the top rope with a big splash, but Flair moved, causing Pillman to crash onto the canvas. Flair locked Pillman in a figure 4, but was broken up by Anderson, who gouged the eyes of the Nature Boy. Moments later, Anderson planted Flair with a spine buster. Out came Sting to a huge ovation, with Flair making the tag and the Stinger cleaning house. Sting hit both Anderson and Pillman with 2 Stinger splashes each, and clotheslined each to the mat. He tossed Anderson to the floor and left Pillman crouched on the top rope. Referee Randy Anderson made the 10 count, with Pillman and Anderson counted out, and Flair and Sting declared the winners. Following the bout, Mean Gene interviewed Sting and Flair, with the Stinger saying that Flair earned his trust. Sting said that he joined Flair in defeating Anderson and Pillman again at Halloween Havoc. The October 23rd episode of Monday Nitro saw King Curtis cut a cryptic promo sitting atop his throne. He claimed to have found a new warrior who he discovered frozen in the Himalayas. Mean Gene interviewed the Taskmaster and the Giant, with the Taskmaster saying that frozen in the ice was the Yeti. In front of the entrance stage, Mean Gene interviewed the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan, who was accompanied by Jimmy Hart. Hogan hyped Halloween Havoc, saying that he fears no man. He said that he may continue to wear all black, making an O.J. Simpson joke by saying, "Everybody knows what a man with a pair of black gloves on and a black rag on his head is capable of doing, dude." Hogan ripped off his neck brace and then addressed his so-called friends, Macho Man Randy Savage, Sting, and Lex Luger. He said that all three were hovering around him like vultures, with each one wanting a shot at his title. Hogan called himself the Big Dog and said that he was going to destroy the Giant in Detroit. In the main event, Sting and Lex Luger defeated Harlem Heat, but the celebration was ruined by the Giant. After chokeslamming both Sting and Luger, the Giant was confronted by the Macho Man Randy Savage. The WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan entered the ring and began brawling with the Giant. Things got out of control, with the rest of the Dungeon of Doom running in and Savage joining Hogan to fight everyone off. Head of Security Doug Dillinger entered the ring with a billy bat and attempted to calm Hogan down. Lights began to flash, and the building rumbled, with an explosion going off in front of the giant iceberg in front of the entrance. As the show came to a close, a giant mummy burst through the block of ice. The October 28th edition of Saturday Night saw Harlem Heat defeat the American Males to become the new WCW World Tag Team Champions. Halloween Havoc took place on October 29th from the Cobo Hall in Detroit, Michigan. In the opening match, Johnny B. Bad defeated Diamond Dallas Page to win the WCW World Television Championship. Sabu made his way to the ring with his uncle, the original Sheik, in his corner. His opponent was JL, with Sabu quick to take the fight to the floor. Sabu hit an acai moonsault off the second rope, landing on both JL and Sheik. JL dove off the top rope with a high cross body, landing on Sabu on the concrete floor. Back in the ring, JL moonsaulted off the top rope, landing on Sabu for a 2 count. JL followed up with a sit-out powerbomb, with Sabu again kicking out at 2. Sabu battled back and hit JL with an Arabian press for the 3 count. To add insult to injury, the Sheik threw a fireball at the face of JL. It was announced earlier in the evening that the Nature Boy Ric Flair had been attacked backstage by Arn Anderson and Brian Pillman. When it came time for the big tag team match, the United States champion Sting battled Anderson and Pillman by himself. As Anderson and Pillman pounded on Sting, Flair raced to the ring in his street clothes. The 2-on-1 beatdown continued until Sting finally crawled to his corner and tagged Flair in. It was all a swerve, with Flair punching Sting in the face, and Anderson and Pillman joining in for a 3-on-1 assault. At the entrance stage, Mean Gene interviewed the trio of Flair, Anderson, and Pillman, who gloated about reuniting the Four Horsemen. On the roof of Cobo Hall, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan and the Giant sat in their monster trucks. Once the grills of the trucks were welded together, the sumo match began. Revving their engines, the object was to push your opponent's monster truck out of the circle. After pushing one another back and forth, Hogan managed to push the Giant's truck out of the circle. The Giant hopped out of his truck and wrapped his hands around the throat of Hogan, backing him up to the ledge of the roof. Hogan pushed the Giant's arms away, causing the big man to lose his balance and fall off of the roof of Cobo Hall. After winning their respective matches, Macho Man Randy Savage battled Lex Luger. Jimmy Hart came to the ring and hopped onto the apron, arguing with the referee. Savage Irish whipped Luger, knocking Hart off the apron and causing Luger to fall to the mat. This allowed Savage to hit the flying elbow drop on Luger and score the pinfall victory. Dressed in black, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hulk Hogan came to the ring with Jimmy Hart by his side. Hogan took the microphone from Michael Buffer, apologizing for the accident that had taken place. Miraculously, the Giant marched to the ring unscathed, with the Taskmaster by his side. Hogan was stunned. The match began, with Hogan attempting a body slam early on, but failing. Hogan was pummeled, with the Giant dominating in what was his first actual in-ring match. The Giant attempted a big leg drop, but Hogan rolled out of harm's way. Hogan hulked up and clotheslined the Giant over the top rope and tumbling to the floor. The Taskmaster and the Giant began to walk away up the aisle until Hogan caught up to them and rammed their heads together. Hogan dragged the Giant back into the ring, but the Giant soon snatched the Hulkster up in a bear hug. The Hulkster hulked up to break the hold, but was cut off by the Giant, who hit the chokeslam. Shockingly, Hogan kicked out at 2 and again began to hulk up. Hogan connected with a big boot and body slammed the Giant in the middle of the ring. Just when Hogan hit the Giant with the leg drop, Jimmy Hart used the championship belt to bash referee Randy Anderson over the back of the head. A confused Hogan asked Hart to help him aid the unconscious official. Instead, Hart shoved the referee aside and bashed Hogan over the back of the head with the WCW Championship. The Giant snatched Hogan up in another bear hug, with Hart hopping around them and the Taskmaster laughing maniacally. Both Randy Savage and Lex Luger raced to the ring in an attempt to save Hogan until reality set in and Luger turned on Savage. The giant mummy known as the Yeti marched to the ring, with Tony Schiavone infamously mispronouncing his name. In a bizarre moment, the Yeti wrapped his arms around Hogan to essentially squeeze the Hulkster even further while still in the Giant's bear hug. The Giant released his grasp, allowing Luger to hoist Hogan up for the torture rack. Luger then put Savage in the torture rack to add insult to injury. Despite the title not being able to change hands via a disqualification, the Giant walked away with the World Heavyweight Championship. The October 30th edition of Monday Nitro saw Tony Schiavone in the ring interviewing the trio of the Nature Boy Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Flyin' Brian Pillman. Holding up 4 fingers, Pillman recounted the events that transpired at Halloween Havoc, and said, "The carnage that ensued has brought us one step closer to this, the symbol of excellence. Some people call us a gang, some people call us a militia, we call it a dynasty, the greatest team on God's green earth." Anderson said, "So we all find ourselves today with our hand going in that similar cramp. There's now 3, soon there'll be 4, and you know what that means." Flair held up 4 fingers and said, "We're back." The November 6th episode of Monday Nitro featured a vignette of Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage hanging out on Venice Beach. Both men were dressed in all black, with Hogan asking Savage to join him on the dark side. Savage said that Hogan was too emotionally involved in the situation, and he'd let the Hulkster know his decision next week on Nitro. Hogan closed by saying, "What you gonna do when the dark side of Hulkamania destroys you?" In another hard-hitting encounter, Eddie Guerrero battled Chris Benoit, with Eric Bischoff on commentary talking about the formation of the Cruiserweight division. A vicious Benoit slammed Guerrero to the mat with a brutal spinebuster and then applied a Boston Crab, bending Guerrero in half at an awkward angle. Sitting in the crowd was Japanese wrestling ambassador Sonny Ono and New Japan Pro Wrestling stars Masahiro Chono, Kensuke Sasaki, Jushin Thunder Liger, and Masa Saito. In the ring, Guerrero battled back and dove off the top rope with a breathtaking high cross body onto Benoit in the aisle. Back in the ring, Guerrero spiked Benoit with a brainbuster and then climbed to the top rope. Benoit caught up with Guerrero and nailed a superplex all the way to the mat below. A powerbomb followed, with Guerrero's head whiplashing off the canvas. Still, Guerrero kicked out of a pinfall attempt. Benoit hit Guerrero with a German suplex in the middle of the ring, but only for a 2 count. After a front suplex onto the top rope, Benoit attempted a back suplex on Guerrero back into the ring. Guerrero shifted his weight and pinned Benoit for the 3 count, despite Benoit's feet clearly under the bottom rope. Fans were allowed to call in and vote for the main event, with 2 locker rooms featuring talent available to choose. The results came in, and the match was announced to be Sting against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Sting battered Flair with ease both inside and outside the ring. The tides turned once Sting missed a Stinger splash and crashed against a steel guardrail. Back in the ring, Flair applied the figure 4 leg lock on Sting in the middle of the ring. Sting reversed the hold, with Flair quickly breaking it. The Stinger hoisted Flair high over his head, press slamming him to the mat below. Flair stuck his thumb in Sting's eye and tossed him to the floor. Referee Randy Anderson prevented Flair from using a chair, with the action returning to the ring. The two traded pinfall attempts until Flair slipped on a pair of brass knuckles and punched Sting in the face. Flair made the cover, with Sting barely kicking out. Sting battled back and superplexed Flair off the top rope. The Scorpion Deathlock followed, with Flair submitting. Sting refused to break the hold, with referees filling the ring in an attempt to talk sense into the Stinger. Members of the locker room raced in, with Sting continuing to wrench in the hold. Hacksaw Jim Duggan pulled Sting off of Flair, but Sting once again applied the Scorpion Deathlock on Flair. Lex Luger talked sense into Sting, who broke the hold and walked away with the total package. In the ring, Mean Gene stood with the Taskmaster, Jimmy Hart, and the Giant, who wore the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. Hart went on a verbal tirade, bashing Hogan for going away to make B movies. Admitting that he had power of attorney, Hart revealed that he signed a contract saying that if Hogan lost by disqualification at Halloween Havoc, he'd lose the World Heavyweight Championship. Since Hogan was indeed disqualified, Hart said that the Giant was the rightful world champion. Out came an attorney that represented the WCW Championship Committee. The attorney said that the Giant was not the rightful champion, since WCW President Nick Bockwinkel said that the world title is officially vacant. A new champion would be crowned in the first ever 3-ring, 60-man battle royal taking place at the World War III pay-per-view at the end of the month. A furious Giant reluctantly handed over the title, with Hart screaming that this wasn't fair. The November 11th edition of Saturday Night featured a pre-taped interview with Sting. He talked about Hulk Hogan accusing him of wanting a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. Sting said, "If you point your finger at me again, I'm going to bite your finger right off." He said, "You're on my turf, this is my front porch, and I'm a big dog around here." A vignette aired, with Hacksaw Jim Duggan traveling to Ireland to trace back his roots. Duggan followed a map to a bar where he met Professor Neil, who had done research on Duggan's family tree. It turned out that Duggan had a great-grandmother named Catherine Ann Duggan, or Mad Katie. She was the ladies' wrapped fist champion. Duggan's grandfather was Stompin' Steven, who was also a taped fist champion. Professor Neil revealed that Duggan has the same mannerisms of his great-grandmother and grandfather, pointing his thumb in the air and putting his fists to his sides. A vignette aired from the dungeon, with King Curtis sitting on his throne. To each side of him was the Giant and the Yeti, with King Curtis calling them the bookends of destruction. The Giant said that he's taken Hulk Hogan to the limit, and when he and the Yeti get their hands on him again, he'll be stuck between a rock and a hard place. The Taskmaster cut a promo on Hogan, saying that they have a lot more in common than the Hulkster thinks. Backstage, Flying Brian Pillman revealed that he and Arn Anderson had scoured the earth to find a whiskey-drinking, skirt-chasing, fist-fighting son of a gun that'll knock your jock off. Pillman said, "And that makes 4. Arn Anderson stepped into frame and introduced the 4th member of the Horsemen, the Crippler, Chris Benoit. The November 13th episode of Monday Nitro saw Hulk Hogan in a dungeon, wielding a black sword and wearing a black mask. Hogan said that Macho Man Randy Savage was going to bring him the head of Ming. He said that he didn't know if Sting was a friend or a foe, but if he's in cahoots with the Dungeon of Doom, he'll move to number 1 on his hit list. The November 18th edition of Saturday Night saw a hysterical Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff pacing around his dressing room. He impatiently waited for a phone call from psychic Gary Spivey, who sensed that something was wrong and finally called Orndorff. After ranting about his bad luck, Orndorff received a package from Spivey. Orndorff opened the box and pulled out a new mirror. Seconds later, Orndorff found a penny on the ground and the head was facing up, signaling that his luck was already changing. Eddie Guerrero continued his rivalry with crippler Chris Benoit, resulting in another exciting bout. Both men grappled to the mat, countering each other's holds. They then traded multiple quick near falls until Guerrero launched himself over the top rope with a springboard plancha, landing on Benoit on the floor. Back in the ring, Guerrero wore down Benoit with a camel clutch and then hit a fisherman suplex for a 2 count. Benoit took down Guerrero with a vicious clothesline and then slammed him with a back suplex. He followed it up with a swan dive headbutt, but Guerrero rolled out of the way and Benoit smashed his face on the canvas. Both men scrambled for a pinfall, with multiple near falls occurring in a short span of time. Guerrero spiked Benoit with a brainbuster, but only got a 2 count. Benoit caught up with Guerrero on the top rope and planted him with a belly-to-back suplex to the mat. The referee made the 10 count, with both men unable to continue. Officials attended to both men, with David Penzer announcing that the match was a draw. A vignette aired featuring Dean Malenko, who demonstrated one of his 1001 holds. In an empty arena, Malenko applied the Texas Cloverleaf on a young trainee, who was quick to tap out. Malenko said, "I'm a man of 1,000 holds, and that was just one." The November 20th episode of Monday Nitro saw Mean Gene interview the Taskmaster and Jimmy Hart in front of the entrance. Hart talked about Hulk Hogan choosing Macho Man Randy Savage to join him on Baywatch instead of Sting, adding fuel to the main event match between Hogan and the Stinger. Eddie Guerrero was scheduled for a match against Ric Flair, but the Nature Boy said that he had better things to do. Instead, Guerrero faced Four Horsemen member Brian Pillman in a hard-fought encounter. Pillman was vicious, rubbing Guerrero's eyes across the top rope and biting his face. He continued toying with Guerrero and then spit in his face. An angry Guerrero tackled Pillman to the mat, punching him repeatedly upside the head. With Guerrero on the floor, Pillman leaped off the top rope. Guerrero moved, and Pillman smashed against a steel guardrail. Not to be outdone, Guerrero soared off the top rope, crashing onto Pillman in the aisle. Back in the ring, Guerrero spiked Pillman with a brainbuster and then climbed to the top rope. Pillman shook the ropes, causing Guerrero to crotch himself on the top turnbuckle. An attempted superplex was countered, with Guerrero shoving Pillman to the canvas and then hitting a beautiful frog splash to score an upset victory. In the main event, Sting, who was dressed in red and yellow, faced Hulk Hogan, who was dressed in all black and wore a black mask. Both competitors battled back and forth, with Macho Man Randy Savage looking on from the floor with his arm in a sling. They battled outside the ring, where Hogan suplexed Sting on the floor. Back in the ring, Hogan wore down Sting until the Stinger soared across the ring with a Stinger splash. Surprisingly, Hogan caught Sting and carried him to the center of the ring with a bear hug. Hogan hit a suplex and made the cover, with Sting kicking out at 2. Sting shifted the momentum and applied the Scorpion Deathlock on Hogan in the middle of the ring. Hogan pushed up and out to break the hold, hulking up and taking down Sting with a big boot. The Hulkster went for a leg drop, but Sting rolled out of the way and Hogan crashed to the mat. Sting put Hogan back in the Scorpion Deathlock, with the Hulkster begging Savage for help. Suddenly, the Dungeon of Doom interfered to cause a disqualification, attacking Hogan, Sting, and Savage. Hogan and Sting fought off most of the dungeon until the Giant grabbed them both by the throats. Savage used a steel chair to smash the back of the Giant. This only angered the Giant, who chokeslammed Savage. Hogan and Sting held the chair at each side and used it to clothesline the Giant over the top rope. World War III took place on November 26th, live on pay-per-view from the Norfolk Scope, and began with Mean Gene interviewing Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, and Sting on the stage. Hogan removed his black headband and black tank top to reveal his traditional red and yellow colors. He said, "The dark side of Hulk Hogan is over, brother." As Hogan and Sting mended fences, a garbage can suddenly burst into flames. Hogan said that they fooled everyone, saying that Savage's arm injury wasn't legitimate. He referenced The Observer, who reported that Savage's injury was real, and that the Giant was scheduled to win the World War III Battle Royal. The Hulkster held up a copy of the popular newsletter, The Wrestling Observer, and said, "Observe this." Hogan called The Observer a rag sheet and threw it into the fire. Johnny B. Bad defended the World Television Championship against Diamond Dallas Page with the managerial services of the Diamond Doll on the line. Both men battled back and forth in a competitive bout for the affection of the Diamond Doll, who favored Bad. In the end, Bad scored the pinfall victory and happily left with the television championship. The Macho Man Randy Savage battled the Total Package Lex Luger, who was accompanied by Jimmy Hart. Savage was vicious, battering Luger in the ring and around ringside. Just when Savage hit a flying elbow drop onto Luger, Hart hopped onto the apron and distracted the referee. Luger shifted the momentum and put Savage in the torture rack on the floor. A frantic Hart screamed at Luger, warning him not to get counted out. Back in the ring, Luger wrenched at the taped-up arm of Savage, with the referee stopping the match. Sting raced into the ring, talking Luger into releasing his hold on Savage. While Luger left with Hart, Sting attended to a hurt Savage. Sting battled the Nature Boy Ric Flair, beginning with Flair running to another ring, making Sting chase after him. Flair stuck his thumb in Sting's eye to gain the advantage, following up with knife-edge chops to the chest. Just as Sting shifted the momentum, Flair again ran to another ring. On the floor, Sting missed a Stinger splash, crashing against a steel guardrail. Back in the ring, Flair struck Sting with a low blow and began wearing down the knee of the Stinger. Flair applied the figure 4 leg lock, with Sting powering through the pain and reversing the hold, with Flair quickly breaking it. Sting chased Flair to another ring and superplexed him off the top rope. A Scorpion Deathlock followed, with Flair submitting, and Sting declared the winner. The main event was the 3-ring, 60-man World War III Battle Royal for the vacant WCW World Heavyweight Championship. There were 20 wrestlers in each ring, with a Giant in each, with Hulk Hogan in one ring, the Giant in another, and the Yeti in the third ring. Once there were 30 competitors left, they'd all convene in the center ring to determine the winner. The action was impossible to call, even with 3 sets of commentators to call the match. 10 wrestlers remained, as Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff attempted to pile drive Hulk Hogan. The Hulkster backdropped Orndorff over the top rope for an elimination. Eddie Guerrero was eliminated next. Sting slingshotted Arn Anderson, causing Ric Flair to lose his balance and fall off the top rope for an elimination. Moments later, Hogan clotheslined Anderson over the top rope for another elimination. Sting and Lex Luger worked together to lift the Giant off his feet, with Hogan adding an extra push to send all 3 tumbling over the top rope. An angry Giant dragged Hogan under the bottom rope and battered him. Savage eliminated the one-man gang, with all the referees seeing the Macho Man as the final man left standing. As Hogan fended off the Giant and body slammed him on the floor, Savage was crowned the new WCW World Heavyweight Champion. An angry Hogan ran back in, pleading his case to referee Randy Anderson that he went under the bottom rope. Savage claimed he didn't see anything, with a desperate Hogan asking the fans to rally behind him. Mean Gene entered the ring in an attempt to make sense of the madness, with a frustrated Hogan continuing to complain about the injustice. Savage again claimed he didn't see Hogan go under the bottom rope, and asked that the Hulkster show him the footage the next night on Monday Nitro. The November 27th edition of Monday Nitro saw Mean Gene interview the new WCW World Heavyweight Champion, the Macho Man Randy Savage. Hulk Hogan interrupted, showing Savage the footage from World War III. Mysteriously, the footage cut off before it could show Hogan getting pulled under the bottom rope. The Giant interrupted, attacking Hogan and chokeslamming Savage onto the concrete floor. In the ring, the Giant battered Hogan until Sting raced to the scene. The Giant grabbed Sting by the throat with both hands and hoisted him high into the air. Hogan used a steel chair to bash the Giant across the back and save Sting. The Hulkster used the chair to bash the Giant repeatedly, even elbowing the referee in the face just for trying to stop the chaos. After the Giant retreated, Hogan and Sting attended to a hurt Savage. In the main event, Sting teamed with Lex Luger to face Arn Anderson and Flying Brian Pillman. During the bout, Sting applied the Scorpion Deathlock on Anderson. Pillman climbed to the top rope, with Luger shoving him off. Unfortunately, Pillman landed on top of Sting, breaking the hold. The Stinger persevered and rolled up Pillman to score the pinfall victory. Nature Boy Ric Flair raced to the ring, ambushing Luger while Anderson and Pillman pummeled Sting. Flair applied the figure 4 leg lock on Sting, with Hulk Hogan racing to the ring to make the save. A frustrated Luger waved off Hogan and marched away up the aisle. Sting attempted to calm Hogan down, with the Hulkster eventually shaking it off. The December 4th edition of Monday Nitro saw Mean Gene introduce the Nature Boy Ric Flair, who came to the ring with basketball great Charles Barkley. Flair praised Barkley and teased that he may someday be a member of the Four Horsemen. In the main event, Macho Man Randy Savage defended the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against the Total Package Lex Luger, who had Jimmy Hart in his corner. After battling back and forth, Savage reversed an Irish whip, sending Luger face first into an exposed turnbuckle. As Luger fell backwards from the impact, he crashed into referee Randy Anderson, sending him tumbling to the floor. Meanwhile, Savage connected with a flying elbow drop, but there was no official to make the count. Nature Boy Ric Flair snuck in and punched Savage in the face while wearing a pair of brass knuckles. While Hart dragged Luger on top of Savage, Flair gloated in the aisle. Hulk Hogan snuck up behind Flair and chased him into the ring. As a wary referee began to make the count, Hogan stopped him. Hogan then dragged Hart into the ring and rammed his head against Luger's. While the bell rang frantically, Sting raced into the ring and tapped Hogan on the shoulder. Hogan turned around and unknowingly punched Sting in the face. An angry Sting shoved Hogan, with the Hulkster shoving back and Savage getting between them. Following a commercial break, Mean Gene stood in the middle of the ring with Hogan, Sting, and Savage. Hogan questioned Sting as to whose side he's really on. Sting assured the Hulkster that he's on his side, but said that Lex Luger is his best friend. The Stinger said he didn't like Jimmy Hart, but stood up for Luger. Sting said that he and Hogan need to settle their differences since they're facing Ric Flair and Arn Anderson next week. The Stinger said that he'd do anything in his power to keep Luger in line. The December 9th episode of Saturday Night featured a pre-taped vignette from Japan, with Sonny Ono rallying up his troupe of New Japan wrestlers for their upcoming series of matches against WCW wrestlers at Starcade. The December 11th episode of Monday Nitro took place in Charlotte, North Carolina, and saw Mean Gene interview the Nature Boy Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Flyin' Brian Pillman. Gene asked Pillman what it was like to be a horseman, with Pillman saying, "It's a chance of a lifetime to be a part of the greatest dynasty in the history of professional sports." Pillman talked about all the people that wish they could be horsemen, including Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, who Pillman said had lost his killer instinct. Orndorff interrupted, confronting Pillman, saying that he could have been a horseman and that's the only reason why Pillman is. Snapping back, Pillman said that Orndorff had settled for mediocrity. Anderson tried to calm down Pillman, who only got crazier. Orndorff yelled in Pillman's face, causing Pillman to slap him. This caused Orndorff to snap, tackling Pillman to the concrete floor. Flair and Anderson ambushed Orndorff, with Pillman joining in for a 3-on-1 assault. Anderson lifted Orndorff up for a piledriver, with Flair jumping off the stage to spike Orndorff head first into the concrete floor. Officials rushed to Orndorff's side to attend to him as the Horsemen scurried away. In the main event, the Nature Boy Ric Flair and Arn Anderson faced Sting and Hulk Hogan, who started out on the wrong foot with separate entrances. Flair and Anderson used illegal tactics to gain the advantage early on. Jimmy Hart raced to the ring and hopped onto the apron to distract the referee, while Lex Luger ambushed Hogan on the floor and put him in the torture rack. Flair and Anderson wore down Sting until the Stinger flopped into his corner and tagged in Hogan. Just as Hogan hit Anderson with a leg drop, Sting hit Flair with a Stinger splash. Hogan covered Anderson to pick up the pinfall victory. Brian Pillman raced in to ambush Sting, while Flair and Anderson pounded on Hogan. Luger raced in, shoving Pillman off of Sting, but not helping Hogan. After gaining his bearings, Sting fought off the members of the Horsemen. World Heavyweight Champion Macho Man Randy Savage ran in, with Sting punching him in the face. Hogan got in between the two before things could escalate. Mean Gene entered the ring for an interview, with Hogan and Savage trying to talk sense into the Stinger. Sting said that he got caught up in the heat of the moment, with Hogan backing him up in an attempt to calm Savage down. Savage said that he respected Sting, and the two shook hands to bury the hatchet. The December 18th edition of Monday Nitro began with Medusa invading the broadcast booth with the WWF Women's Championship in her hands. She proceeded to drop the belt into a garbage can and said, "And that's what I think of the WWF Women's Championship belt." Medusa said, "This is where the big boys play, and now this is where the big girls play." In the opening match, the Nature Boy Ric Flair defeated Eddie Guerrero in a hard-fought bout. Following the match, Mean Gene entered the ring to interview Flair and Arn Anderson, only to be interrupted by the Taskmaster. After saying that he respected both Flair and Anderson, the Taskmaster said, "You've got a loose cannon on your ship," referring to Flyin' Brian Pillman. The Taskmaster was angry that Pillman mocked the Dungeon of Doom last week, warning Anderson to keep Pillman on a short leash. Anderson wasn't receptive to the Taskmaster interrupting them, with Flair sticking with his Horseman brother. In the main event, Macho Man Randy Savage defended the World Heavyweight Championship against the Giant. Hulk Hogan interfered to cause a disqualification, bashing the Giant repeatedly with a steel chair. He even waffled referee Nick Patrick over the head with the chair. Officials and wrestlers tried to maintain order, only for Hogan to hit head of security Doug Dillinger over the back with a chair. Steve Mongo McMichael and William the Refrigerator Perry tried to calm an angry Hogan down. They failed, with Hogan eventually racing up the aisle to bash the Giant and the Taskmaster with the chair. Hogan joined Savage in the ring for an interview with Mean Gene, where the Hulkster asked for a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. Savage said that he'd grant Hogan his title match after Starcade. The December 25th episode of Monday Nitro saw the Macho Man Randy Savage defend the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Both men were vicious from the get-go, bending the rules in an attempt to gain the advantage. Savage applied the figure 4 leg lock on Flair in the middle of the ring, with Jimmy Hart on the floor, pushing the bottom rope out for the Nature Boy to grasp in order to break the hold. The fight spilled to the floor, where Flair Irish whipped Savage back and forth against steel guardrails. Back in the ring, Flair wore down the injured arm of Savage until the Macho Man battled back. Savage dove off the top rope with a double axe handle, but Flair met him with a fist to the stomach upon landing on the concrete floor. Flair rolled Savage back into the ring and honed in on the left knee of the champion. The Nature Boy applied the figure 4 leg lock on Savage, grabbing onto the ropes behind the referee's back to put more pressure on the knee of Savage. The referee caught on and broke the hold, allowing Savage to shift the momentum. Savage dove off the top rope, smashing Flair over the head with a double axe handle for a 2 count. Lex Luger raced in, attacking Savage to cause a disqualification. Sting ran in, but was immediately ambushed by Flair. Fighting back, Sting hit Flair with a Stinger Splash. As Flair and Luger retreated, Savage slapped Sting across the face, leading to a heated argument to end the broadcast. Starcade took place on December 27th from Nashville, Tennessee, and kicked off with the first in a series of matches between WCW and New Japan Pro Wrestling for the World Cup of Wrestling. Jushin Thunder Liger battled Four Horsemen member Crippler Chris Benoit in a high-impact bout. The Taskmaster made his way to ringside to distract Benoit and cost him the match, with Liger picking up the victory. Eddie Guerrero faced Shinjiro Otani in an excellent display of technical wrestling. The action intensified, with Otani springing off the top rope and landing on Guerrero with a big dive on the floor below. Back in the ring, Otani wore down Guerrero and hit him with a German suplex for a 2 count. Otani followed it up with a spinning leg lariat off the top rope, but failed on his second attempt, with Guerrero hitting Otani with a Frankensteiner off the top rope for a 2 count. Guerrero connected with a Splash Mountain powerbomb, with Otani barely kicking out. The fight spilled to the floor, where Guerrero connected with a springing high cross body off the top rope onto Otani on the floor. Otani shifted the momentum, hitting a springing missile dropkick to the back of Guerrero's head. Both men traded pinfalls on the mat until Otani managed to roll up Guerrero for a pinfall victory. With the score tied at 3 apiece, Sting battled the United States champion Kensuke Sasaki to determine which promotion would win the World Cup. Sasaki applied his own version of the Scorpion Deathlock on Sting. The Stinger persevered and put the Scorpion Deathlock on Sasaki in the middle of the ring for a submission victory. Sting won the World Cup for WCW, with members of the locker room celebrating the victory. Mean Gene presented Team WCW with the enormous Gold World Cup and congratulated the 7 members of the team. The Nature Boy Ric Flair, the Total Package Lex Luger, and Sting battled in a triangle match to determine who would receive a shot at the World Heavyweight Championship immediately following the bout. A coin toss was held to determine which 2 would start the match, with wrestlers able to tag out at any time. Sting and Flair won the coin toss, with Luger forced to stand on the apron. Both Sting and Flair battled back and forth, both in the ring and on the floor. A frustrated Luger got antsy on the ring apron, begging for a tag. Sting superplexed Flair off the top rope and made the cover, with Luger entering the ring. Surprised, Sting broke the pin and asked Luger what he was doing. As Luger returned to the ring apron, Flair struck Sting with a high knee to the back, causing Sting to stumble into the corner. Luger tagged in, with Flair attempting to retreat up the aisle. Racing after him, Luger carried Flair back into the ring for a pummeling. The Nature Boy shifted the momentum by sticking his thumb in Luger's eye. Flair began to wear down the leg of Luger, even striking him with a steel chair behind the referee's back. A figure 4 leg lock followed, with Luger screaming in pain. Moments later, Luger used his brute strength to reverse the hold, with Flair quickly breaking it. Luger shook off Flair's chops, with a desperate Nature Boy tagging Sting in. Uneasy, the two friends, Sting and Luger, shook hands, and then locked up. Luger unleashed his aggressive side, pummeling Sting with no remorse. Sting battled back, and hit a high cross body off the top rope onto Luger for a 2 count. A desperate Luger struck Sting with a blatant low blow to regain the advantage. Sting battled back and hit Luger with a Stinger Splash, but failed on his second attempt. Luger hoisted Sting up for a torture rack, with the legs of the Stinger inadvertently knocking out the referee. Flair entered the ring and took out the knees of Luger, who dropped Sting and collapsed to the canvas. The Nature Boy tossed both men to the floor and woke up the referee, who proceeded to count Sting and Luger out. This meant that Flair was the victor and would receive his title shot in the main event. Macho Man Randy Savage defended the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Standing at ringside was Jimmy Hart, while Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff looked on from the aisle, wearing a neck brace. While Orndorff was escorted away by security, Savage dove to the floor with a double axe handle, but was met with a punch to the stomach from the Nature Boy. Flair pummeled Savage up and down the aisle, with Jimmy Hart getting in a cheap shot of his own. Back in the ring, Flair attacked the injured left arm of the champion and continued to wear him down. Hart tossed his megaphone into the ring, which Savage intercepted and used to bash Flair over the head and bust him open. Savage dove off the top rope, smashing onto Flair with a flying elbow drop. While Hart distracted the referee, Fly and Brian Pillman raced to the ring to toy with Savage. While the referee tried to get Pillman out of the ring, Anderson snuck in and ambushed Savage. A blood-soaked Flair covered Savage and scored the pinfall victory to become the new WCW World Heavyweight Champion. The rest of the Four Horsemen and Jimmy Hart celebrated with a bloody Flair. Pillman began to use the championship belt to whip Savage repeatedly, and then shoved 4 fingers in his face. What tricks would the Four Horsemen pull to ensure that the World Championship stayed with the Nature Boy in the new year? Find out next time as we continue our WCW arc and cover World Championship Wrestling in 1996. If you'd like to support the show, please like, share, and subscribe. You can follow us on Instagram at squared.circle.history. We also have Squared Circle History and Pro Wrestling Rushmore merchandise available at Pro Wrestling Tees. Thank you for listening, and keep dropping elbows.